241. Disguised Dewey wanted Shelob the Great Spider's silk to fashion an invisibility cloak. The problem was that Shelob, a descendant of Ungoliant, was immensely powerful and dangerous. Worse, her lair sat at the pass of Cirith Ungol on Mordor's border, dangerously close to Minas Morgul, once Minas Ithil, a Gondorian fortress, now a stronghold of Mordor. Going there would risk bringing him within Sauron's notice. Still, Dewey thought the risk worth taking. If anything went wrong, he could slip away with a portkey at once. He didn't need to kill Shelob, he only needed enough silk. Mentos. Dewey transformed a brooch into a one-time portkey and gripped it. The world spun, and he reappeared in Edoras, the Rohirrim's capital. Portkeys could only take someone to places they had visited before, so he could not teleport straight to Shelob's lair. He had to approach from a familiar point first. He did not linger in Edoras. From there, he shortened the distance by apparition, leaping from one visible spot to the next until he reached the easternmost reaches of the White Mountains and entered Gondor's territory. At the eastern end, the Anduin flowed south toward the sea. East of the river rose the north-south mountains of Shadow, the very range that formed Mordor's western border. Shelob's lair lay on the western side of the pass of Cirith Ungol, amid those mountains. The pass was one of the few western approaches into Mordor, and was watched by the Tower of Cirith Ungol, a watchtower originally erected by Gondor after the last alliance. In Gondor's decline, it had fallen into Sauron's hands. Dew apparated across the Anduin and arrived by the Mountains of Shadow. He could have spun a short distance south to Minas Tirith and checked in there, but to avoid complications, he resisted the temptation. His only mission on this trip was silk. Everything else could wait. As he approached Cirith Ungol, he saw the watchtower in the distance and the orcs patrolling around it. After a moment's thought, he waved a hand and changed his clothes into tattered rags like the orcs wore. His facial features shifted, his skin grew deathly pale. He conjured a mirror and nearly laughed at his reflection. "Ah, so ugly," he muttered. In the mirror he was no longer Dewey, but an orc, sparse hair, flat nose, blue lips, and tusks. Reluctantly accepting the image, he disguised his staff as a heavy wooden club and swaggered toward the tower. A one-eyed orc in ragged armor blocked him as he reached the guard post. "Stop! Where do you come from? I've not seen you before," the captain barked suspiciously in black speech. A group of orcs standing nearby, clearly his band, glared at Dewey with hostile eyes. Dewey halted, assessing them while he used legilimency to probe their thoughts and memories. The one-eyed captain, feeling ignored, snarled and rushed forward, swinging a spiked club. "You deaf runt? Answer or I'll break you," he snarled in black speech. The captain reeked of rot. The stench nearly made Dewey gag. Without speaking, Dewey seized the club and with a single motion sent the orc flying. The other orcs froze, stunned. "You dare hit me? Runt, today you die. I'll tear you apart," the captain roared as he pulled himself together, eyes blazing. He charged again, dagger in hand. Dewey let the fight play out. He held back some of his strength and hid any refined technique, fighting with broad, brutal blows meant to look like raw savagery. The two traded heavy strikes. Dewey's skill, honed under Eladon and Elrohir, made the fight easy for him, but he masked it well. The watching orcs cheered and jeered, convinced they watched a genuine brawl. When the captain lunged with the dagger, Dewey blocked the club, caught the blade, and under the leader's stunned gaze, slit his throat with it. Black blood poured out. The captain collapsed and spasmed, then lay still. Silence fell. Dewey tossed the blood-streaked dagger to the ground and announced in a low voice, his eyes the color of cold iron, "Now I am your captain. If any of you doubt it, step forward and challenge me. But if you try, you will die as he did." He smiled with disdain. The orcs exchanged looks, said nothing, and after a moment bowed their heads. "Captain," they called. "Captain," the cry echoed from 100 throats. In orc culture, strength decides leadership. To kill the leader and take his place was the accepted way. The slain orc had ruled them for years and had beaten back every challenger. Killing him guaranteed Dewey's authority. No one suspected a spy. They only saw an orc who could win. Dewey was now captain of the 100-odd orcs guarding the tower, responsible for holding the pass against Gondor. In truth, Gondor was too weak now to threaten them. The orcs spent most days idle. "Captain, what do we do with the old captain's corpse?" an orc asked cautiously. Dewey shrugged, cold. As always, send it to the Torek Ungol lair. Torek Ungol was Shelob's den, an enormous, reeking cave at the foot of a nearby cliff. To make Shelob an effective guardian of the pass, Sauron's forces fed her. Heavily wounded or dead orc guards and useless captives were delivered to her webbed halls and eaten. Shelob gladly accepted the food. A grim arrangement had formed. Shelob sat at the pass and ate any who tried to enter Mordor there, and Sauron's minions, in return, supplied her with corpses. The orcs dreaded the task of delivering bodies to her. Those who made the trip often did not return. Shelob's appetite was indiscriminate, and those caught by her sometimes became food as well. The orc who'd asked the question paled. "Who will carry it?" he stammered. Dewey watched the surrounding bodies tense and shrink. He let a faint, mocking smile cross his face. "I won't choose," he said. "We'll draw lots. 2 who draw the marked arrows will carry the body. I will draw 2, no exceptions." The orcs were stunned that their new captain would gamble with them. Dewey collected 100 arrows, dyed the tips of 2 of them red, and put them all into a long tube with only the tails visible. The 2 who pulled red would be the ones to take the corpse to Shelob. They lined up to draw, each orc growing paler as they fished an arrow out. Whenever one drew an ordinary arrow, they sighed with relief. At one point, an unlucky orc pulled out a red arrow and crumpled in despair. The others showed no sympathy. As the arrows dwindled, tension rose. At last, only 2 arrows remained. 1 orc and Dewey stood before the tube. The orc hesitated, nervous. Dewey grew impatient, shoved the other aside and said, "Why are you stalling? I'll go first." He reached in, grasped an arrow, and pulled. A collective gasp went up. The crowd stared as Dewey held up a red-tipped arrow. Shock and astonishment spread among them. The orc who had been kicked aside looked suddenly relieved and even pleased. When Dewey pulled out the last red-tipped arrow, the orcs fell instantly silent, holding their breath. Orcs respected strength. They were afraid that whoever had drawn a red arrow might go mad with rage and turn on them. To their relief, Dewey showed no expression. He simply said, "All right. Since it's been drawn, I and that one will go deliver it." The others breathed easier, surprised that he would honor the draw. This new captain not only looked strong, but also true to his word. If he returned from the spider's lair alive, they would accept him as their leader. Only the one other orc who had picked a red arrow was desolate. He had already lost half his life before even seeing the giant spider. Amid the others' backhanded well-wishes, Dewey and the chosen orc set off to carry the former captain's corpse more than 20 miles to the spider's lair. Dewey, of course, didn't stoop to the heavy work. He strode ahead like a lord. The unlucky orc trudged behind, resignedly bearing the dead captain, a warrior larger than himself. After they left, the remaining orcs realized they didn't even know the new captain's name. "What does it matter? He'll end up in a spider's belly," one sneered. They all agreed. There was a good chance neither of the 2 would return. The old captain was dead, and the new one likely soon to be. Might this be their chance to vie for command? The orcs' eyes slid suspiciously to one another as thoughts of ambition and treachery grew. Dewey walked the steep stairs and tunnels toward Cirith Ungol with an effortless air, relaxed but mentally alert. The orc behind him panted and stumbled, nearly collapsing under the corpse. He dared not ask Dewey for help, and only quickened his pace when the new captain urged him impatiently. The mountains of shadow were aptly named. Perpetual dark clouds and black mist clung to the peaks. Vegetation was sparse, rock was bare, and few folk set foot here. At last they reached the massive west rock face of Cirith Ungol, where jagged stones formed a natural maze and a cavern yawned like a black mouth. Light seemed to be swallowed at the threshold. The air was stale and fetid, oppressive and silent. The carrying orc trembled. "Boss, this is the spider's lair. Let's drop the corpse here and leave. Quick. We won't get out if we linger." Dewey smiled and nodded as if indulging a request. "Fine, put it down and go." "Really?" The orc brightened, not expecting such mercy. "Of course not," Dewey murmured, and a cold command slipped over the orc's mind. "Imperio." The orc's relief vanished. He obeyed blankly. "Take the corpse to the cave entrance," Dewey ordered. The controlled orc did as told, hauling the body to the mouth of the cave and standing there like a puppet. Dewey melted into concealment and waited. A stir rose from inside the cave. A black giant spider the size of a house crawled out. Its body was grotesquely bloated behind a short, knotted neck. Its segmented legs ended in hooked talons, great horns jutted from its head, and eyes clustered in twin hordes across its face. The spider's black carapace shimmered with an unwholesome light, and a foul stench rolled from it like a physical thing. Facing it was like facing darkness itself. Sight seemed to be drained away, colors faded from memory, touch and hearing dulled. This was Shelob, last spawn of the night god Ungoliant, feeder, weaver of fate, dark mistress. Shelob answered to no one. She served only herself and tolerated Sauron at most in a mutual, uneasy bargain. From Ungoliant she had inherited a ravenous hunger. Elves, men, orcs, all were food. Sauron, for his part, fed her the injured, the dying, the expendable. In orc society, where constant infighting decided rank, the weak or badly hurt were never rescued, sent instead to Shelob as rations. She accepted the steady supply gladly and demanded, as her price, that none pass unmolested through the pass of Cirith Ungol. Even without that bargain, she would have let no prey escape. Now Shelob smelled fresh meat. She spat threads of silk and wrapped the corpse into a tight bundle with her two front legs, then fixed her many eyes on the blank figure of the controlled orc. In an instant, she lashed out, stinging him with a venomous barb and cocooning him as well. Instead of dragging her catch back into the cave, though, she turned her attention to a distant hiding place. Dew no longer hid. He dropped the disillusionment charm and stepped out. Shelob's eyes gleamed with the thought of a second meal, then narrowed in puzzlement. "You are not an orc. What are you?" A hoarse, scraping voice issued from the creature, like fingernails raking glass. Dewey, who had once faced the Spider Queen clearing Mirkwood, was not surprised she could speak. Still, he was careful. Shelob's presence was an oppressive field that dulled the senses and clouded the mind. Dewey cast a clumency to seal his thoughts within a mental fortress. The wooden stick in his hand lengthened into a staff, and he fired a spell. Avada Kedavra! A green flash streaked toward Shelob's vast form. She answered with a thick black web spat before her, which the curse struck and exploded against. The web, however, absorbed most of the blow, more elastic than brittle, leaving only a ragged hole where the curse tore through. Dewey's eyes narrowed. Silk like that, stretched into a cloak, would make an ideal invisibility cloak. Shelob bristled. "You are not an orc. You are a wizard. I will eat you." Her legs, sheathed in chitin and tipped with claws, slammed forward. Confringo! Dewey shot at the incoming limb. The explosive hit slowed the attack, but did not pierce chitin as hard as steel. Dewey slammed up a shield charm. It took one blow like an iron pillar, but shattered under the next. He hurled spells and bolts, none of them breaching her armored hide. Shelob's defense was nearly absolute. Worse, her eyes unleashed a psychic onslaught. When Dewey's gaze met hers, he felt his vision warp. Were it not for his occlumency, the mental fortress would have failed, and his mind would have been swallowed. Even so, the illusion gripped at his senses. An all-encompassing blackness, endless and suffocating, and thousands of Shelobs closing in from every direction. He could not tell where to focus or how to defend. In the physical world, Dewey stood tense and directionless, assailed by phantom attackers. Shelob watched him, triumphant. She opened her maw and spat a long, sticky black web at the hapless wizard, intent on binding him to drag him into the cave. The web shot out, then slammed into an invisible barrier a meter from Dewey and collapsed. Shelob's many eyes went cold and keyed in on the source, a ring of power gleaming on Dewey's left hand. 243. Spider silk weaving clothes. Shelob the great spider refused to believe the barrier and searched for any weakness, battering it with brutal force. Only then did she realize the magic barrier provided a flawless 360-degree defense. Frustrated, she spat a stream of spider silk at the barrier. With her forelegs, she propped up Dewey, still protected by the ward, and wrapped him directly in silk. Layer upon layer cocooned him and the magical barrier he sustained until he was enclosed inside a giant black chrysalis. "Humph. Even if you hide in a turtle shell, wrapped in my dark web, you won't get away," Shelob crowed. Maintaining the ward consumed magic. When Dewey's power ran out and the barrier collapsed, she would have him. Confident, she dragged the bundled cocoon, Dewey and the two orcs bound with him, back into the utter black of her lair. Shelob's den was a vast labyrinth of tunnels draped in midnight webbing, that swallowed light. Not even the light of Arendelle could penetrate it. The place was blind and disorienting. Eyes meant little, and the other senses blurred. Scattered everywhere lay skeletal remains, great beasts, orcs, men, even elves, piled into hills that outnumbered the spectral bones on the paths of the dead. Since the War of Wrath, when her ancestor Ungoliant fled into the void, Shelob had feasted for millennia. Ungoliant had been a hunger-born being from the dark beyond the world. Shelob, descended from her, shared that endless craving. Like any spider, Shelob injected venom into her prey to liquefy internal organs and muscles, then sucked them out. She drove her stinger into an orc corpse, and the venom went to work, dissolving muscle and bone into a stinking broth. The living orc, who had been under Dewey's Imperio, was freed by the venom, but awakened to a worse fate, acutely aware of his body dissolving until he died. After finishing the two orcs, Shelob turned to the black cocoon around Dewey. She raised her tail and stabbed her stinger into the snare. The venom she released was corrosive and began eating at the magic barrier, ripples appearing, the ward thinning at a terrifying rate. Shelob smiled, certain the shield would soon break and leave Dewey for her to devour. Then her body froze. She screamed and shot upward. Her stinger, once a lethal spear, split cleanly off and lay useless. A piercing holy light poured out from the gaps in the spider silk and flooded the pitch-black lair. From inside the cocoon, a blade of searing flame split the webbing. Dewey stepped out, the sword of blazing flames in one hand and the phial of starlight in the other, the brilliant light of Arendelle spilling from it. The sacred radiance made Shelob shrink back, uneasy and stung by the brightness. At that instant, the system pinged. Hogwarts Sign-in System, locating Mountains of Shadow, Torek Ungol Cave. Dew blinked. He hadn't expected a sign-in here, but he wasn't missing free benefits. He murmured inwardly, "Sign in. Sign in successful. Congratulations on obtaining Madame Malkin's magical textile craft." Madame Malkin's textile craft? He was surprised and a little bemused. Madame Malkin ran the robe shop in Diagon Alley, where Hogwarts students had their uniforms made. He wasn't opening a shop. What use did he have for a tailoring method? There was no time to brood. Shelob still wanted him. She spat a black mist that spread like a net, swallowing the light and smothering Dewey from all sides. At that same moment, the eye of Sauron atop Barad-dûr swept its gaze in this direction. Dewey felt it. Since his soul had been transformed, his sensitivity had sharpened. He didn't hesitate. Smiling at the recoiling Shelob, he said, "Thanks for the silk. Goodbye." He put a hand on the silk cocoon that had been around him, activated a portkey, and vanished from the cave in an instant. Shelob howled in rage as Dewey disappeared. The sound cut across the pass of Cirith Ungol and carried to the orcs at the nearby watchtower at Minas Morgul. They trembled. "It's the spider," one stammered. "Who angered her?" "Maybe the captain and his lot," another said. Only Dewey's party had gone into Shelob's lair. "Whether it was them or not, they won't come back alive. The Spider Queen doesn't let victims go," another sneered. Fingers immediately pointed, and plans changed as orcs jostled to replace the assumed dead leaders. Back on Weathertop, Dewey finally let himself breathe. The mission had gone almost perfectly, only gaining Sauron's attention at the end, and he had escaped before Sauron could intervene. Still, he knew Sauron would now be more watchful. Anywhere within the range of the Palantir would be unsafe. Luckily, Weathertop lay too far for Sauron to see with it, so he could relax for the moment. He turned to the black chrysalis he had brought back and grinned. To trap him, Shelob had spun a massive casing of silk, enough to make not one invisibility cloak, but 10. Shelob's silk was famously tough. Even sharp elven blades had trouble cutting it. Its real weakness was fire, specifically the fires of a Balrog. Ordinary flames could not harm it. Dewey's sword of blazing flames, however, had a flame crystal in its hilt charged with Balrog power. It had absorbed fiend fire and could unleash wind blades. That was how it had sliced through Shelob's webbing. More than its toughness, the silk had potent magical properties. It blocked light itself, so even the light of Arendelle struggled to pass. Such material was perfect for an invisibility cloak. Dewey set to work immediately. Most invisibility cloaks in the magical world are enchanted as whole garments, imbued with transient concealment. The Peverell family's cloak used a different method. It was woven, each thread forming runic symbols, thousands linked into a perpetual enchantment. That is why the deathly Peverell cloak could remain unspoiled for 1,000 years. To reproduce a Peverell-style cloak required exquisite weaving, flawless stitching of every runic sign. Dewey had neither time nor talent to learn weaving to that level. Even if he had the book knowledge from the sign-in, Madame Malkin's magical textile craft, it didn't make him a master overnight. He couldn't learn everything he signed for. His energy was limited. He would turn to Arwen. Arwen was a rare treasure, capable in combat and magic, and gifted in song, language, painting, forging, cooking, and textile arts. Many of Dewey's clothes, including the robe he wore now, had been woven by her, fine, subtle, and perfect. Every tapestry and curtain in Hogwarts Castle bore her work. She would not refuse. Dewey extracted the memory of the magical textile craft and fed it into the crown of wisdom. Placing the crown on Arwen's head, he let the knowledge flow to her. Arwen already possessed masterful embroidery and weaving. With the craft's instruction and the crown's blessing, she absorbed it like someone building on a firm foundation. They prepared the materials together. They unraveled Shelob's silk and soaked it in a special solution that removed its tackiness while preserving its tensile strength. Dewey smelted mithril and drew it into threads finer than a hair to mix with the silk. When the materials were ready, they began weaving the invisibility cloak. Weaving the invisibility cloak was a huge undertaking. The cloak had to be woven by hand, inch by inch. It could not be crafted with ordinary magical weaving. Spells would destabilize its enchantment, and the work itself demanded an almost unimaginable delicacy. It was like the hand-woven brocades of Dewey's previous life. Machines could churn out cloth, but the finest shoe and yun brocades still had to be made by a skilled hand, and a single mistake could ruin the whole piece. The invisibility cloak was far more exacting. It required weaving individual strands of spider silk and mithril thread into tadpole-sized runes, placed every inch across the fabric. The whole cloak needed tens of thousands of those runic knots. An ordinary weaver might spend a full day on a single rune. That would put the project at roughly 10,000 days, nearly 3 years, as Peverell had once taken. Arwen, however, was no ordinary weaver. Her fingers moved like a blur. She possessed not only exquisite technique, but astonishing speed. In less than half a day, she could complete a perfect rune, immediately cutting the timetable in half. Her speed only improved with time. After a few months, she was making at least 3 runes a day. What would originally have required 3 years now looked like it could be finished in roughly a year. To strengthen the cloak's magic, Arwen wove strands of her own long hair into it, neutralizing the darker attributes of the spider silk. Dewey worried over her beautiful hair and brewed a hair growth potion so he could restore it afterward. Arwen did most of the weaving. Dewey lacked her skill, so he focused on design and support. 3 months slipped by as the work continued, threads flying between them. While Arwen labored at the loom, Dewey prepared for the 3rd stage of the Philosopher's Stone's refinement. With the rise of Lumbar, Saturn, approaching, he conserved his strength. For this stage, he did not travel to Orthanc in Isengard. He stayed at Weathertop Hogwarts Castle. The stone circle he had used before when making Hufflepuff's golden cup remained here, and that array could channel Saturn's power, making it the ideal spot for the 3rd transformation. When Lumbar crested the eastern horizon, Dewey stood within the stone circle. On the stone platform in the circle's center, the mithril furnace burned with blood-red dragon fire. Inside the furnace's double-necked flask lay a white powder that shimmered with a silver light and gave off a faint jasmine-sweet scent. For fuel, Dewey had returned to Isengard and drawn over a dozen barrels of dragon blood from the wyvern that had finally recovered, reserving that precious fuel for the refinement. As the star reached its zenith, Dewey activated the stone circle. He dropped the Arkenstone he had prepared into the furnace. Under the dragon blood flames, the earth elemental power locked within the Arkenstone flowed out. The formation drew on the star's power. Lumbar flared in the night sky, and a pillar of starlight descended into the stone circle. The phenomenon drew notice across Middle-earth. Rumors spread of the continual column of starlight Dewey was summoning. Even the great eye atop Barad-dûr in Mordor turned its gaze westward, its sight full of covetousness and resolve. A faint echoing voice whispered from Barad-dûr, vague, half to itself and half in answer, but Dewey paid it no heed. All his focus was on the furnace. The stone circle funneled a steady stream of Saturn's power into the formation. Motes of starlight swirled like dust and made the array glow. Dewey wove his magic with a precise wand movement, guiding Saturn's power from the formation and the earth element from the Arkenstone into the flask to mingle with the white stone. Under the licking dragon blood flames, they began to react and fuse. Gradually, the silver-white powder in the flask shifted toward gold. At first, it was only a thin sheen, a tiny droplet of golden liquid that glowed like trapped sunshine. The light was warm and gentle, with an aroma like sun-warmed linens. The glow burned through the mithril furnace, turning its silver surface to a wash of gold and bathing the stone circle in sacred light. Dewey felt the radiance wash over him. Warmth and a subtle growth of power flowed through his body. His life potential seemed to expand. His flesh felt as if it were being remade toward a higher plane. But the transformation carried an immediate, painful side effect. His senses sharpened to an almost unbearable degree. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch all multiplied in sensitivity, not empowering him so much as drowning him in sensations. Colors became an assault, sounds that had been background noise, his own breathing, the trickle of blood, the beat of his heart, the subtlest vibrations of the formation, rang in his ears like thunder. Smells that had once been pleasant suddenly cut and stung. Tastes were exaggerated. The feel of his robes against his skin became a source of constant irritation. Even a soft breeze felt like sand. The hypersensitivity made it nearly impossible to concentrate or sustain the magic required by the formation. Dewey closed his eyes, cast a deafening charm to blunt his hearing, and sealed his nose to deaden smells. He sat in meditation and forced his will, maintaining a steady flow of magic into the furnace while trying to clear his mind. Time stretched. Lumbar sank toward the west, yet the stone circle blazed on. The starlight pooled in the array and coated Weathertop in a pale glow. The Maulong and white trees on the heights shone. The light could be seen from Bree, and even as far as Hogsmeade. Travelers and townsfolk stopped and stared. Bards set quills to song, and painters lifted their easels to capture the sight. Days slid by, and the starlight within the array slowly waned. The dragon blood fuel never faltered. Dewey kept pouring Saturn's power and the Arkenstone's earth element into the flask, and the white powder continued to convert. The golden liquid grew, and its light intensified until, by the 49th day, the substance in the flask was almost wholly gold. The glow rivaled the light of Arendelle, a tiny sun within the furnace, and it wrapped the stone circle and the castle in a sheet of living gold. Though the formation contained most of it, a trickle of golden light escaped and washed the castle. Plants, animals, and people touched by that stray radiance received an invisible blessing, improved health, and a lengthened life. Only Arwen and Smaug, who were close enough to feel the change, fully understood. The castle's servants and helpers remained unaware at the time. Later, however, people would notice that those who had worked in the castle enjoyed unusually long, healthy lives, and Weathertop would come to be spoken of as a blessed place that conferred longevity on its inhabitants. For Dewey, the flux of warming power continued to build his life force, even as his enduring sensory agony tried his resolve. His consciousness felt pulled in 100 directions by the amplified senses, but he would not yield. The refinement pressed on, every ounce of his will bound to the formation until the white had turned to gold, and the flask held the new, shining promise of the Philosopher's Stone. After the white substance in the flask had fully transformed into a golden liquid, the dazzling radiance suddenly dimmed and the brilliant light faded. Dewey finally exhaled, exhausted. Without the blinding glow, the extreme amplification of his five senses ebbed, and the torment that had pushed him several times to the verge of giving up eased. His perseverance had paid off. His senses remained far sharper than before, but now he could control them, and the pain was gone. His eyesight could pick out the village of Hogsmeade at the foot of the mountain, and even travelers walking the east-west Grand Road dozens of miles away. The colors and cuts of their clothes clear, as if seen close up. He could hear faint movements in the distance. A bard by the Black Lake was loudly reciting a ballad praising Hogwarts, Pretty lines poorly performed, Dewey noted to himself. His sense of smell separated the scents of grass, various flowers, the white tree, the malong tree. He could close his eyes and, by scent alone, tell which blossoms the breeze carried and from which direction. So, do I have a dog's nose now? The thought flashed through him. His sense of touch had sharpened too, giving him something like a spider sense, a proactive awareness that warned him of nearby danger. If an enemy tried a sneak attack from behind, he would feel changes in the air and could dodge or react before the blow landed. The enhancement now suited him. He could deliberately dial the acuity up or down, avoiding the overwhelming agony it had caused earlier. Physically, he felt more like an elf, not only stronger, but extraordinarily perceptive. What surprised him even more was the stimulation of his life potential. The transformation had extended his lifespan dramatically. Even without true immortality, his new body could easily live 300 to 400 years, far longer than a typical Dunedain human. He was elated. He extinguished the dragon blood flame in the furnace, opened it, and took out the flask. The arkenstone he'd placed in the blaze had miraculously not burned, although after having so much earth elemental power drawn from it, the gem's once dazzling white light was now muted and dull. The golden liquid in the flask spun of its own accord, forming a tiny storm that emitted a faint aureate glow, no longer blinding, but charged with far more energy. This was the successful third stage of the Philosopher's Stone refinement, the sun wheel or yellowing stage. At this stage, the liquid could not yet transmute lead into gold, but it could extend a life. Consuming it might lengthen a person's years to 600 or 700, perhaps even a millennium. Of course, any alchemist who had reached this point would be mad to stop at drinking the liquid for a few centuries and thus lose the whole. No one in their right mind would trade a completed Philosopher's Stone for mere longevity. How long the liquid could truly extend life remained theoretical. Only the final reddening remained. Once complete, the red Philosopher's Stone would be born, the ultimate treasure capable of granting immortality and transmutation. Congratulations, Dewey, your Philosopher's Stone is only one step from completion. Outside the stone circle, Arwen, who had waited nearby the whole time, genuinely shared his joy. Dewey stroked her cheek, smiling, and placed the flask of golden liquid in her hands. In a low, solemn voice, he said, "Once the Philosopher's Stone is made, I will use it as my betrothal gift and ask Lord Elrond to give you to me in marriage." Arwen's eyes widened, and tears pooled in her starlit gaze before bursting into a radiant smile that seemed to light the world. "Yes, I look forward to it," she answered. The final stage of refining the Philosopher's Stone required the integration of fire and air and had to be performed under a Venus-Mars conjunction, the two planets visible together in the night sky. Such conjunctions happen roughly once a year and can last from a few days to, in rare cases, decades. Elrond predicted that this year's conjunction would occur in 1 month and would be unusually long, 2.5 months. Dewey would not have to wait long before starting the last phase. For the final refinement, he also needed concentrated fire and air elements. The ring of air and the ring of fire could provide these condensations, so he only needed to enlist Elrond and Gandalf. Elrond, who mostly lived in Rivendell, was easy enough to contact. Gandalf, however, was restless by nature and hard to pin down. Dewey could send messages with a Patronus, but the Patronus was not omnipotent. Over long distances, it could falter, as if the signal were weak. It might not even maintain cohesion, let alone deliver a message. So Dewey went to the Owl Tower and asked the owls there for help. The Owl Tower stood in the northwest corner of Hogwarts Castle. The upper part served as an owlery, the lower as a stable. The owls there were great snow owls. Dewey had brought from a luminous in the northwest, creatures from Numenor who associated with the great eagle Thorondor on the Malong tree, and far cleverer than ordinary owls. Dewey used them as his messengers and had specially brewed an owl potion for them. In the magical world, owls are the primary postal system for witches and wizards. Properly tamed and fed a special potion, an owl learns to understand speech and to find recipients with uncanny accuracy, even if they are constantly moving. The owl potion's quality determines how intelligent and reliable an owl becomes. Cheap potion yields dull birds, while excellent potion produces sharp, dependable messengers. As a potion master, Professor Snape had once sold high-quality owl potions in Diagon Alley to earn his keep and had even improved the recipe. Dewey learned that recipe and brewed a batch for his great snow owls. After drinking it, the owls gained heightened homing ability and magical affinity. Given a name on a letter, they could find the rightful recipient without an address. He handed a missive for Gandalf to one such owl, fed it some strips of meat, and watched it fly off. A week later, the great snow owl returned bearing Gandalf's reply. Gandalf was in Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor, and he promised to be back 1 week before the Venus-Mars conjunction. Dewey breathed easier. While he waited, he turned his attention to the invisibility cloak. Arwen had already half-woven it. Its primary threads were the silk of Shelob the Great Spider, supplemented with mithril thread and strands of Arwen's hair, producing an overall black fabric. Silver threads formed mysterious tadpole-shaped runes and patterns that, from a distance, looked like sparkling stars across a night sky, mysterious and alluring. Dewey had contributed the design, but Arwen had done most of the weaving. Every inch of the cloak was stitched with runic magic. Each rune had to be unique and yet interconnect with the others to form a coherent enchantment, tens of thousands of runes in all. Dewey admitted he would never have had the patience to sew it by hand for 3 years. Arwen not only proved to be an exquisite weaver, she worked quickly and flawlessly. Her runes were vivid and perfectly matched the cloak's overall magic. Her speed cut the work time by 2 to 3 times, and she kept accelerating without sacrificing quality. At that rate, she could finish the invisibility cloak in less than half a year. By then, the Philosopher's Stone would be close to completion. 2 great achievements would soon be within their grasp. A month passed in the blink of an eye. 1 week before the Venus-Mars conjunction, Dewey arrived at Isengard and began preparations on Orthanc. The final stage of the stone's refinement would cause the greatest upheaval and demand the most energy. Only by using Orthanc as an amplifying wizard tower could he hope to ensure success. He moved the furnace to Orthanc and inscribed formations and runes on the tower's peak with mithril, rune by rune. Then Gandalf arrived from the south, mounted on Shadowfax, the Lord of Horses. "Long time doer. I'm not late, am I?" Gandalf called with a laugh. 2146, Venus conjunct Mars. Gandalf. Dewey stepped forward with a grin and hugged him. "Long time no see. How have you been?" "Quite well. I've been in Gondor lately. Just a few days ago I was discussing the eastern border with Regent Ecthelion II, Gandalf replied cheerfully. "Your owl messenger is remarkable, by the way. I was riding Shadowfax fast when I received the letter. I was astonished it found me." Dewey smiled. "They're good at delivering letters. I worried it might not find you and only relaxed when it brought your reply back." A shrill cry split the sky. "What's that?" Gandalf asked, eyes brightening. Dewey nodded. "That's Aslan. He must have heard you'd arrived." From the distance, a griffin the size of a small hill swept in and landed before them. Griffin Aslan looked every inch the king of both sky and land, the mane and bulk of a lion, the fierce beak and keen eyes of a giant eagle. Gandalf's face lit up. "Goodness, he's grown splendid. What a handsome fellow." If Pegasus was the elves' favorite mount, the griffin was perfectly to Gandalf's taste. Had he not already had Shadowfax, he would have wanted a griffin of his own. Aslan was unabashedly affectionate toward Gandalf, welcoming his approach and touch. Shadowfax, however, was less pleased. The proud horse snorted and stamped nearby, issuing a warning neigh and twitching his hooves as if itching to give that interloper a good kick. Aslan, cunning and playful, rubbed himself against Gandalf deliberately, right where Shadowfax could see. The horse's ire flared further. Gandalf hastened to soothe his mount, murmuring reassurances, but Shadowfax turned his head away, refusing any touch, plainly jealous at how his master's eyes had brightened at the sight of the griffin. Dewey watched, amused. The spectacle, this proud, offended Shadowfax and the insolent, winning Aslan, had him laughing silently. Eventually, Dewey bowed an invitation. "Come up to the tower and rest," he said. The 2 beasts continued to glare at one another, but knowing neither would truly fight, Dewey and Gandalf left them to it. Inside Orthanc, a 3-headed wolf, Cerberus, stood guard at the door. Gandalf blinked in surprise at its size. "Good heavens, he's grown! If he keeps growing, you'll have to expand the tower." Cerberus remembered Gandalf and recognizing a friend of his master, did not bare its fangs. The enormous creature wagged its great tails, acting spoiled, then leaned each of its 3 massive heads forward to inspect Gandalf with 6 curious eyes and a big wet nose. Gandalf, unfazed by the beast that could have swallowed him whole, reached out and scratched each chin. The wolf closed its eyes and purred contentedly. "He's slowed down lately," Dewey said, shaking his head. "I don't know how much bigger he'll get, but I think he's nearing his limit." Cerberus was enormous, well over 10 meters tall, one of Dewey's largest companions. He breathed fire, his teeth and saliva were poisonous, his gaze could stun, and his bronze hide covered iron bone structure impervious to ordinary blades. His magic resistance was formidable, and wounds healed quickly. His genetics were a strange composite, dragon, basilisk, even traces of the Watcher in the water, and as a result, he was terrifyingly powerful, second only to Dragon Smaug among Dewey's holdings. Dewey had even set him loose at the dragon breeding ground to act as a shepherd for the wyverns. The wyverns' fire had no effect on Cerberus, they were the ones who fled. Thus Cerberus had become Dewey's most formidable guardian in Isengard. He watched Orthanc. Aslan patrolled the skies. Together they made Isengard difficult to approach when Dewey was away. Dewey led Gandalf up the tower and produced a golden cup. It summoned a marvelous spread, fruits, delicacies, and beverages laid out before Gandalf. Dewey uncorked a bottle of Dorwinian wine, a gift from an elven landowner, and poured. Gandalf admired the cup's magic. Beyond its ability to heal and refresh, it could summon prepared foods and produce fare by drawing from existing stores elsewhere. It did not create food from nothing. Instead, it seemed to expand or relocate nourishment that already existed. That meant goods might vanish from some distant kitchen as they appeared in Isengard, or a freshly prepared meal might be taken from some other table. But given sufficient magical support, the cup could multiply existing provisions to feed a village, town, or entire city. In other hands, such an artifact would be world-changing, a divine relic capable of determining nations' fates and sparking wars over possession. And yet here it was, used simply to entertain a guest. Gandalf's admiration deepened, and with it his respect for Dewey. If Dewey had sought dominion like Saruman, displaying the cup and offering free food would win the hearts of multitudes and secure a kingdom, but only a handful knew of the cup's existence. Dewey brought it out for friends and for his own use, otherwise he kept it hidden. Dewey professed to have no taste for ruling. Hogsmeade and Bree had come under his oversight by coincidence. Isengard had been entrusted to him by Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel. He rarely interfered beyond checking for abuses. The towns were largely run by their mayors, and the Dunlendings, who had submitted to his protection, were left to govern themselves. Dewey's one true ambition was simply to become stronger, for its own sake. That motive baffled most in Middle-earth, where strength usually signified the first step toward domination. Morgoth, Sauron, Saruman, they sought power to rule. To many, to grow strong and not use that strength to seize power seemed pointless. In their eyes, Dewey's solitary desire for strength made little sense. To Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel, Dewey struck a different chord. He was a promising, positive young man, even a little too conservative in Elrond's estimation. Gandalf grew comfortable in Orthanc. With leisure at last, he watched Dewey lay out magical arrays, offered the occasional counsel, petted Cerberus, took a few circuits on Griffin Aslan, and wandered into the woods to meet the winged hippogriffs. The dragon breeding ground was another temptation Gandalf could not resist. He delighted in seeing the wyverns. He was so content he nearly forgot the passage of time. The day of the Venus conjunction arrived. The green flame in the fireplace guttered up, and a familiar, composed voice came from the entryway. Elrond returned from Rivendell. "Mithrandir, long time no see. I didn't expect you to arrive before me," he said with a small smile. Gandalf chuckled. "Lord Elrond, affairs kept you busy. I had nothing pressing, so I came a week early. I've been so well entertained here with Dewey, I almost lost track of time." Elrond turned to Dewey. "Is everything prepared, Deweyer?" Dewey inclined his head. "Everything is ready, Lord Elrond. We're just waiting for the Star of Eärendil and the Star of Carnal to appear together tonight." Elrond nodded. "Good. This convergence will persist for several months, the longest such alignment in 1,000 years. The starlight will be abundant. The the likelihood of successfully refining the Philosopher's Stone is much higher. But at the final moment, Elrond warned gently, you must keep your mind steady, stay calm and composed, do not let pressure overwhelm you. I will, Dewey said. He listened intently as Elrond spoke. Of all those who cared for the stone's creation, Elrond perhaps cared most. He feared his daughter repeating the fate of Luthien and Beren, the sacrifice of immortality for mortal love. With steady wisdom, he had aided Dewey's efforts to craft the Philosopher's Stone, not for power, but so Dewey might gain a way to live long enough to stand beside Armai. That paternal concern shone plain and true. 247. Gifts from Arundel. In the evening, as the sun sank into the western ocean, two dazzling stars rose together where the light had gone out. One shimmered white, the other glowed like fire, clearly the star of Arundel, Venus, and the star of Carnal, Mars. On the platform at the top of Orthanc, Dewey stood at the center. Before him sat a mithril furnace. At his feet, a magic circle of mithril had been etched with countless runes. Elrond, Gandalf, and Arwen stood quietly outside the formation. As Dewey activated the circle and fed it a steady stream of power, the mithril runes flared with silver light. The tower itself seemed to awaken, vibrating faintly and emitting a hum too subtle for ordinary folk to hear. Elrond and Gandalf raised their hands in unison. The rings they wore, one warmed with air, the other with fire, glowed as those elements poured into the circle. With the aid of the two elven rings, the formation tapped even more power. Air and fire from for miles around were drawn in, forming a roiling sea of elements that surged into the circle. Simultaneously, the stars of Arundel and Carnal above linked with the formation and cast down two pillars of starlight, one white and one red, into the circle. The twined beams were striking in the night sky and were noticed from the Lonely Mountain in the north to Gondor in the south, from Eriador in the west to Mordor in the east. People were startled, but not unnerved. After so many oddities that year, they had grown used to sudden wonders. Many guessed, as they had before, that Dewey was responsible. The anomalies had repeatedly centered on Weathertop and Isengard, and word traveled fast. Far above, across the firmament, a beautiful ship sailed through the sea of stars. A white hull, gilded oars, sails like silver moons, and a curved prow like a swan. Upon its deck stood a tall half-elf, a white bird perched on his shoulder, and a crown upon his brow. At its center burned a dazzling silmaril. Its light mixed with the light of the bearer, so that it was impossible to tell which shone more brightly. The figure turned his gaze down as the starlight was guided to earth, and the events at Orthanc became clear to him. He stroked the bird on his shoulder and murmured, smiling, "Arwen, our granddaughter, has a beloved of her own. He is an interesting young man." The white bird answered with a melodious trill. The half-elf listened and then, with a faint smile, said, "Let us give them a hand." He was wreathed in light as the silmaril on his brow flared brilliantly, illuminating the heavens. On Orthanc, Dewey continued to sustain the formation, drawing in the power of both stars. Then he looked up in surprise. Elrond and Gandalf looked up too. The star of Arundel above had grown impossibly bright, its glow rivaling the moon. From it descended a thicker, purer beam of light, a pillar of power that poured straight into the magic circle. It was unlike ordinary starlight. It felt as though the very essence of the Silmaril itself were poured down. Dewey's eyes widened in alarm and awe. No formation, however strong, should be able to accept such crystalline stellar essence. Elrond and Gandalf, watching his confusion, understood. Gandalf smiled and said, "Do not fear. This is a gift from Arundel, a blessing that few have ever been given." Elrond added quietly, "The star of Arundel is, in truth, a Silmaril. What pours down is not merely light, but the power within the Silmaril. It will help you forge a far finer Philosopher's Stone. Waste it not." Understanding dawned on Dewey. He remembered what he had been taught, that the star was Earendil himself, sailing the heavens in Vingelot. Earendil was father to Elrond and forebear to Arwen. The Silmaril's tale reached back further, to Luthien and Beren, who stole a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown and suffered uncounted trials. After Luthien became mortal, the jewel passed down through Dior to Elwing. When the sons of Fëanor came for it, Elwing leapt into the sea with the Silmaril and was rescued by Ulmo, transformed into a great white bird who flew the Silmaril to Arendil's ship. Guided by its light, They reached Valinor and pleaded with the Valar. The Valar set Vingelote beyond the Door of Night, and Eärendil sailed the firmament wearing the Silmaril, becoming the great star of hope. The gift that now poured down came, in truth, from that long history. Dewey allowed himself a private, somewhat astonished pleasure at being shown such favor. He guided the purer essence of the Star of Eärendil and the fire of the Star of Carnal into the mithril furnace. Under the dragon blood flames, they were fed into the golden liquid held in the double-necked flask. Elrond and Gandalf kept pouring the powers of the air and fire rings into the meld. Time passed. By the second morning, as the sun rose, the two stars eased back into the heavens, but the magic circle continued to glow over Orthanc. The stellar energy collected through the night had filled the formation and now scattered like stardust. The very summit of the tower shone as if a star had been embedded in it. The nearby Dunlendings had watched the beams since nightfall. Now, seeing the unceasing starlight at the tower's top in daytime, many fell to their knees in awe. Some began to worship Dewey as a god. Inside the furnace, the dragon blood fires burned with an intensity unmatched before. The double-necked flask's glass vaporized almost at once, leaving only a mass of golden liquid suspended in the inferno. The substance did not boil away. Under the catalysts of dragon blood and celestial power, it absorbed air and fire, and took into itself the strength of both stars. At last, a tiny red speck, so small it could almost be mist, appeared in the gold. Like a drop of cinnabar in molten metal, it shone with a deep, piercing light. That red point sent its glow through the furnace and struck Dewey. For an instant his mind opened, thoughts cleared, understanding quickened, and his perception of the world sharpened as if he had been crowned with wisdom. All the spells, potions, and alchemical doctrines he had learned returned to him with crystalline clarity. New insights unfolded where there had been only murk. Power flowed more freely through him, his faculties accelerated. Dewey felt an elation so great it almost made him giddy. But the glow brought more than wisdom. As the brilliance built, so did illusions, visions grown from the deepest wells of desire. They swelled and pressed upon his mind, magnifying what he longed for and whispering promises until they threatened to overwhelm him. Dewey set up a clumency, building a mental castle to hold them at bay, but the castle was meant to repel outside assaults, not fires started within. He could restrain these magnified yearnings for a time, but he feared what would happen as more of the golden mass turned red. From his experience, he knew the late stages would amplify desire until it could seize a man wholly. Should he fail, he would not only see his work ruined, the Philosopher's Stone left incomplete, but he himself might be consumed by those desires, becoming no better than those enslaved by the One Ring. The difference would be subtle. Where others became servants of a ring, he would be a puppet of his own longings. Elrond, Gandalf, and Arwen outside the circle watched Dewey's struggle with mounting concern. Elrond's face tightened with worry. "This will be longer and harder than before," he said solemnly. "If Dewey endures and resists all desire, his mind will be utterly harmonized, and the stone he makes will be perfect and without flaw." But how great the difficulty of that harmony! Even Elrond himself would not claim he could always deny the deepest impulses of the heart, how much less a young man like Dewey. Elrond had prepared contingency measures. Were Dewey to break, they would rouse him in time to prevent the worst. The price would be the same as with Nicholas Flamel's stone, power enough to grant life and wealth, but not to heal every wound of mortality or to prevent the subtle ravages of age. 248. Did I go back in time? As night fell, the hidden Star of Eärendil and the Star of Carnal rose again from the western horizon, their light falling on the pinnacle of Orthanc and feeding the magic formation. When morning came, the stars faded, but the formation continued to work on the residual starlight. Day after day, the golden liquid in the furnace slowly reddened. The red glow grew stronger and stronger. Bathed in that crimson light, Dewey's mana surged. His spiritual realm climbed steadily, and his understanding of spells deepened. But the same light amplified the desires hidden in his heart, turning them into lifelike illusions. In those visions, he had limitless power. Sauron obeyed him. Morgoth was his defeated servant. The Valar bent the knee, and the world lay at his feet. He rose from Maya to Valar, then beyond the Valar to the level of Iluvatar himself. he pierced the void and saw the true world of magic. He met the Peverell brothers, became Death, bestowed the Deathly Hallows, watched the four founders establish Hogwarts, and finally returned to his original homeland to become its sole god. The fantasies felt unbearably real, and it grew harder by the day for Dewey to tell dream from reality. He had to cling to the last thread of reason, bolstering it inside his mental castle and keeping desire from breaching the walls. Outside the formation, Gandalf and Elrond stood guard, pouring the power of their rings into the ritual. Arwen did not leave either. She watched Dewey inside the formation with a worried expression. This conjunction of Venus and Mars had lasted far longer than the last omen. Starlight fell for weeks, and the people of Middle-earth had grown used to the nightly alien sheen. More than 2 months had slipped by. It was the 72nd day of the 4th stage of refining the Philosopher's Stone. All but a sliver of the furnace's gold had turned to red. The ruby liquid now flared at its brightest. The red light flared outward, bathing Orthank's summit and Isengard in its glow, until the tower seemed set with a red star. Hippogriffs in the surrounding woods squinted in comfort. The three-headed wolf in the tower, Griffin Aslan, and Shadowfax, all were touched by the light, but unaffected by the spiritual temptations it magnified. The animals felt only warmth, not temptation. Gandalf, Elrond, and Arwen, closest to the formation, felt their own mana rise. Even at the pinnacle of power, Elrond and Gandalf sensed a slow but steady increase in their strength, an unexpected boon they noted even as they remained fixedly concerned for Dewey. "Mithrandir," Elrond said in a low, urgent voice, "I feel desire surging just from exposure to that light. Dewey is facing it directly. The assault on him is countless times what we bear. I don't know how long he can hold. If he sinks, we must wake him and drag him back." Gandalf watched Dewey's figure, struggling but not yet broken. "The longer he endures, the greater the reward," he answered. "I will use Narya to stoke his courage and hope. It may carry him through." Gandalf activated Narya, the ring of fire on his finger, and funneled a portion of its power into Dewey. Elrond's tense brow eased at once. "He is lucky," he said, managing a small smile. "Of the 3 elven rings, Galadriel's is protection, mine is for healing, and your ring, Mithrandir, helps to understand and resist corrosive emotions. Perhaps it will help him pass." Narya's blessing rekindled Dewey's exhausted spirit. His shaky mental castle steadied. The ring's light, warmth, courage, and hope could not erase the amplified desires, but it gave Dewey's last flicker of reason new strength, like a candle catching a breeze of oil. His pressure eased. He pulled himself back from the brink. But danger remained. As the furnace's red liquid continued to swallow the last of the gold, the power of desire climbed without limit. Even the deepest, most repressed wants in Dewey's heart surfaced, as if a heart demon inside him were swelled and clawing to break free. His spiritual defenses creaked under the strain. He settled into the deepest meditation he could muster, into a state of no thought, to resist the ceaseless onrush. When the final sliver of gold vanished, the furnace erupted in a brilliant, almost unbearable red. The light struck Dewey full on. Desire magnified to its extreme, a flood that broke across his mental castle like an avalanche and drowned his consciousness. "Elrond," Gandalf snapped. "Wake him." Elrond's features went white. He threw his ring's power toward Dewey, trying to shake him with spiritual force. "Dewey, wake!" His voice boomed in the trapped mind. Gandalf doubled down with Narya, pouring hope into the breach. Both worked at the edge of their strength, but Dewey did not respond. His soul was buried deep in illusion. Arwen watched, horror and resolution crossing her face. She noticed the Evenstar pendant she had once given Dewey, hanging on his chest through the shifting visions. A look of decision hardened her features. She stepped forward and channeled the Evenstar's light, focusing it on the thread that still linked him to the world of men. A sudden, shrill alarm cut across an ordinary bedroom in a distant city. Dewey jerked awake to a phone's blare, blinking at the ceiling of his small rental apartment. The room felt familiar and strange, as if he hadn't lived there in ages. For a moment, he could not place himself. "Was that a dream?" he muttered, rubbing his eyes. He tried to recall the dream's details, but they were veiled and fragmentary. Had he gone somewhere else in his sleep and seen incredible things? He laughed to himself, thinking he'd been reading too many transmigration novels. He forced the images away, showered, dressed, and went about his day. Coffee, rush hour, the monotony of corporate life. The line between waking and dream niggled at him. When he lay in bed at night, exhausted, a persistent thought kept surfacing. This wasn't the life he was meant to live. Once, during those half-sleep moments, he swore he heard a voice calling his name. He told himself he was burnt out and avoided seeking psychiatric help for fear of losing his job. He spent weekends hiking alone, going to amusement parks, or watching movies to blow off steam. Weeks later, drawn by nostalgia rather than new release, Dewey found himself in a cinema showing the 3D IMAX re-release of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He had seen the films before and could recite the plot, but he sat watching with unexpected intensity. The faces on the screen, Gandalf, Elrond, Arwen, felt not just familiar, but intimate, like people he had lived alongside for years. When the scene came where Arwen and Aragorn declare their love, something inside him tightened with a sour, irrational jealousy. Arwen should not belong to Aragorn, she should belong to him. The thought startled him. It was absurd, but the feeling was sharp and real. Then, as Aragorn vanished from the frame, the actress playing Arwen seemed to change. Her features became those of an impossibly beautiful elf, her eyes flaring with starlight. She looked straight through the screen at him and smiled. "Dewey, wake," she said with the voice he'd been hearing in sleep. "This is not real. Come back." The cinema around him blurred. Arwen stepped out of the picture, leaned forward, and in an emotion both gentle and absolute kissed him. A brilliant light erupted, wrapping them both. The world folded and unmade itself, retreating until only a single point remained. Dewey's mind cracked open. Memories surged back in a flood, smells, voices, the press of warm light, until every fragment snapped into place. He gasped, the illusion shattered. He opened his eyes inside the magic formation. Dust motes of red light danced in the air. For a moment he stared, breathless, as if a lifetime had passed between blinks. "Dewey, are you all right?" Elrond and Gandalf stood outside the magic circle, their faces drawn with concern. In Elrond's arms, Arwen lay weak and pale, but she still watched Dewey with anxious eyes. After a period of confusion, Dewey's consciousness returned. He glanced down at the Evenstar necklace shimmering on his chest, then at Arwen. The memory of the illusion came flooding back, and he realized she must have done something to pull him free. He scrambled to his feet and hurried out of the circle to her side. "What did Arwen do? How did she wake me from that vision?" Elrond looked from his daughter to the worried young man, sighed, and explained, "Gandalf and I tried to rouse you, but we could not. Seeing you in critical condition, Arwen used the Evenstar to form a soul link with you and call you back." Dewey's face went pale. "What harm will that do to her?" Elrond smiled faintly and shook his head. "Do not worry excessively. She is suffering only from magical exhaustion. A few days' rest will mend her. The problem is that your souls are now bound, closer than twins. If you are harmed, she will feel it. So I expect you to take care of her and not let her be hurt." Touched by how much Arwen had given, Dewey bowed his head. "I swear it. I will keep both of us safe." He took Arwen in his arms, summoned the golden cup, poured in water from the Hildorian stream, and fed it to her. The spring's waters were charged with magic, and in the cup their effect was amplified. Arwen's color returned, modestly at first, then more fully. She smiled up at him. "You needn't worry, Dewey. I'm much better now." "Go check on the Philosopher's Stone quickly," Gandalf urged. "We shouldn't leave anything to chance." Dewey shook his head. From his spatial pouch, he produced a potion and blended a few drops into the golden cup, swirled it with a little magic, and offered it to Arwen. "Drink this first. It's a soothing potion. It will help you recover." Trusting him, Arwen drank, and her strength returned by the moment. "Such touching devotion," Gandalf said with a chuckle. "Always so ready to sacrifice for one another." Elrond said nothing. He watched with mild, paternal approval. When Arwen could stand, Dewey allowed himself to relax and turned to the furnace at the heart of the circle. The crimson light had long since faded. The two guiding stars, the Star of Eärendil and the Star of Carnal, had vanished into the morning heavens as the sun rose. Their conjunction was over until next year. Dewey opened the mithril furnace. The dragon blood flame had died. In its place floated a small red gem the size of a baby's fist. It was irregular and crystalline, glowing faintly like an uncut ruby. He cradled it in his hand and felt a vast, unprecedented energy within, the fusion of spirit, soul, and life, the four elements, earth, air, water, fire, and the essences of Elenmere, Mercury, Lumbar, Saturn, the star of Arendelle, Venus, and the star of Carnal, Mars. It was a mysterious, creative force unlike any he had known. Elrond smiled and said, "Congratulations, Duir. You have created a perfect Philosopher's Stone. You have passed every trial." A flawless Philosopher's Stone requires the alchemist to achieve complete internal alchemy, mental unity, through each stage. Duir had not fully achieved that state, yet at the last moment, Arwen's soul link had pulled him from the illusion and allowed the stone to complete its final metamorphosis. It was a fortunate, unexpected shortcut, but the result was genuine. Duir could not help the bright grin that spread across his face as he held the stone. He thought of Nicholas Flamel, a stone that had failed its final test, a premature Philosopher's Stone. Flamel's stone granted long life, but not eternal youth. His body still aged and weakened until he chose to destroy the stone rather than languish as a living corpse. A true stone, however, grants eternal youth through an elixir of life made from it, but that elixir must be consumed continuously. If the intake ceases, natural aging resumes. Besides the elixir, the stone could transmute base metals to gold. Eagerly, Duir touched an iron rod to the stone. At first nothing happened, then he suffused the stone with magic. It flared red, and the iron quickly transformed into a gleaming golden rod. Duir cast a cutting spell and cleaved it in two. Both pieces were truly gold. Gandalf laughed. "Now I can safely call you the richest man in Middle-earth. With a stone like that, you could have as much gold as you wished." Arwen smiled. The happiest would be Smaug. He'd be in business, making those poor spiders weave ceaselessly to fill his hoard. Elrond and Gandalf chuckled together. They both remembered the dragon's boundless avarice. Duir too smiled, though he knew turning metals into mountains of gold still demanded magical energy and would not be effortless, even with the stone. With the stone's successful refinement, Elrond and Gandalf's task was complete. As Elrond prepared to return to Rivendell, Duir stopped him, and to everyone's surprise, stepped forward holding the Philosopher's Stone out on open palms. "Lord Elrond," Duir said, voice steady and earnest, "I come to you with the deepest respect. I adore your daughter Arwen. She is my sole and eternal pursuit, the resting place of my soul in this world. I ask for your mercy. Allow me to take her as my wife. I swear by my name, Duir, and offer the Philosopher's Stone as my betrothal gift. I will cherish and protect her all my life and never betray your trust." Arwen covered her mouth, tears of joy welling in her eyes. Gandalf beamed and nodded. Elrond looked long at Duir, at the sincere, nervous young man, then at the stone offered. According to custom, a groom's betrothal gift becomes the bride's personal property, managed by her alone. By offering the Philosopher's Stone, Duir was willing to relinquish ownership entirely. Elrond was moved by such sincerity. After a long pause, the Lord of Rivendell's expression softened into a relieved smile. "I promised you once, if you could achieve immortality, I would permit this marriage. You have created the Philosopher's Stone, and so you have fulfilled your part of the bargain. I give my consent. Take my most cherished jewel and protect her. Give her happiness." There was one more formal requirement. Before it may be final, you must entrust a person of standing to come to Rivendell officially, and in the presence of witnesses, sign a marriage contract and set a wedding date. Duir nodded eagerly. Gandalf laughed and stepped forward. "Allow me to be your delegate and officiant. I think I am qualified." "Of course," Duir said without hesitation. Elrond agreed. With Gandalf's standing and ties to Rivendell, he was an ideal choice. They were still wrapped in the afterglow of the moment when far away, in Mordor, Sauron's eye turned westward to Isengard. Atop Barad-dûr, a monstrous dragon 1,000 meters long reared, its head circled by an iron crown. Its presence chilled the surrounding dark creatures into uneasy silence. Saruman stood upon the dragon's back, staff in hand. Around the great beast, 100-sized wyverns writhed in black mist, their huge pupils burning with ghostly fire. On the backs of some of the wyverns, hybrids of dragon and fellbeast, rode ringwraiths. "Depart," Sauron commanded. The great dragon beat its colossal wings and rose. The winged wyverns followed. Wingless wyverns, packed with swarms of orcs on their backs, surged westward out of Mordor, a dark storm moving toward Isengard. Gondor and Mordor were chiefly separated by the Mountains of Shadow, and the region of Ithilien on the western side of those mountains served as a fragile buffer. Ithilien lay between the Anduin to the west and the Mountains of Shadow to the east, bounded to the north by the Dead Marshes and to the south by the Poros. Once the Garden of Gondor, it had fallen to ruin as Gondor weakened. Minas Ithil controlled the pass into Mordor. When it was taken, it became Minas Morgul, and for the last century the fortress there had been tightly held by the Dark Power. Apart from the occasional patrol of orcs, no great invasion had come, until this day, when the host within Minas Morgul poured out in full force. At the pass of Cirith Ungol, a continuous wave of Mordor's armies streamed through the mountains and into Ithilien. Among them was the orc band Duir had earlier encountered while gathering the silk of Shelob. The orc Duir had gone into Shelob's lair and never returned. The watch at the tower assumed he had been swallowed. After internecine fighting, the job of captain fell to a stronger orc, who had barely enjoyed his new authority a few days when he was ordered to join the assault on Gondor. Like so much cannon fodder, his squad died in the fighting. To move into Gondor, the Mordor host first had to cross the Anduin, and the Great Bridge of Osgiliath was the only viable crossing. Osgiliath, Gondor's ancient capital, straddled the river and was linked by that great span, its east and west districts at either end. For years the bridge had changed hands. Though Gondor had abandoned the east and held the west, reinforcement and vigilance had been increased after Gandalf warned the regent of the growing threat. Because no great war had come for so long, many assumed peace would hold. They were wrong. Tens of thousands of orcs swept through Ithilien, massed on the east bank, crossed the bridge, and attacked the west district. The Gondorian defenders mounted a frantic defense and sent word to the capital for aid. Orcs rushed across the bridge to the gates of the west district, set siege ladders, and tried to scale the walls. Gondor sealed the gates, manned the ramparts, rained arrows down on the attackers, and toppled the ladders. For a time the defenders held. Countless orcs fell from the bridge into the Anduin below. But then, obeying a command, the orcs drew back, and a new terror advanced. Huge trolls, almost immune to ordinary arrows, thundered forward carrying black iron spheres. Each iron ball bore a hissing fuse. Anyone who had seen such things before would have recognized them as gunpowder bombs. Saruman's teachings to Mordor had borne a dangerous fruit. The defenders, unnerved and unready, tried to stop the trolls, but the missiles did little. A monstrous explosion shattered the gate. The ground shook, and the sturdy doors were blown outward. Many defenders were killed where they stood. The orcs poured through with a savage chorus. Inside the West District, the fighting was desperate. Gondor's men were forced back as wave after wave of orcs and dark troops crossed the bridge. The commanding general resolved to drive the enemy back at all costs and then destroy the bridge. Leading a charge, Gondor's troops cut through enemy ranks and spilled out onto the Great Bridge, hoping to sever the crossing. The struggle sent men and orcs alike tumbling into the Anduin, but fate turned against Gondor. The general was struck by a stray shaft and, with his horse, plunged into the river. The defenders failed to destroy the bridge's supports. With their leader gone, morale collapsed. Gondorian resistance crumbled. After a day and a night of savage fighting, the West District fell. With Osgiliath in Mordor's hands, the Anduin no longer protected Gondor. Mordor's forces now had a direct path across the Pelennor to Minas Tirith. A messenger galloped the news to the capital. The regent of Gondor was alarmed. He ordered Minas Tirith readied for full defense, and the northern signal fires along the White Mountains kindled to call Rohan for aid. Gondor's signal hills, 7 in all across the White Mountains, flared in succession. Yellow smoke and flame leapt skyward and traveled westward to Edoras, where King Thengel watched the summons with a heavy heart. Rohan, too, was under threat. An army of tens of thousands of orcs had emerged near Mordor's Black Gate, and joined by Easterlings, was pushing toward the borders of the Riddermark. The king faced a wrenching choice. The old alliance bound him to aid Gondor at the lighting of those fires, yet Rohan's own lands were menaced. In the end, Thengel sent 1,000 riders to Minas Tirith and set about mustering the realm's armies. He also asked his advisors if he should seek help from his western neighbor, the wizard who commanded Dunlendings and held great power. The king remembered the strange stellar portent that had lasted more than 2 months and the Saruman's spy whom Duer had uncovered. He thought of Duer's skill and of Saruman's potential for help. Thengel picked up a pen, wrote an earnest letter, and dispatched a rider at full gallop toward Isengard. News of the fall of Osgiliath had already reached Isengard faster than the rider. The regent of Gondor possessed a crystal of Minas Tirith and had used it to contact Gandalf. Gandalf himself had Saruman's palantir. Through these devices, Gandalf and Duer learned what had happened almost immediately. Duer felt a chill. In his memory, this attack should have come later, during the Great War of the Ring. Why had Mordor moved now? Something was different, and the change set his teeth on edge. Gandalf, over his pipe, looked grave. "What has altered?" he muttered. "Sauron should not be fully restored yet, so why this sudden assault on Gondor?" He could not afford delay. Rising, he apologized to Duer. "Forgive me, Duer, but I cannot act as your proxy in Rivendell to formally ask for Arwen's hand at the moment. I must ride to Gondor. Minas Tirith must not fall. If it does, all of Middle-earth will be imperiled." Duer was not surprised. He waved away Gandalf's apology. "There's no need. Rivendell can wait. With Gondor in peril, Lord Elrond will be concerned as well. This is no time for a proposal." Gandalf smiled faintly. "When this is over, I will go to Rivendell and see that you have your chance." "Do you need me?" Duer asked. "May I come with you?" Gandalf shook his head. "My purpose is to inspire Gondor and to organize its defense. I can do that best alone. Besides," he looked past Duer, troubled, "I fear Saruman may seize the chance of Mordor's attack to make a play for Isengard. You must hold Isengard against him." Hearing that, Duer did not press the matter. They had all seen Saruman's ambition. He had been hunted and then brought back like a stray hound. It would scarcely be believable if he watched Mordor march on Gondor and took no advantage. Duer, then, prepared to stay and hold the fort. Because the urgency of the situation was so great, Gandalf even considered abandoning Shadowfax and flying over the White Mountains on a broomstick straight to Minas Tirith. Dewey stopped him. "Even flying that way would take a long time. I can make a portkey that will teleport you into Gondor. It won't put you in the city itself, but it will save you many hours." Gandalf's eyes lit up. "With your magic, that would make things so much easier." Dewey produced a mithril ring and touched it with his wand. "Mentos." The ring trembled and glowed blue. He handed it to Gandalf and explained, "I've enchanted this ring as a portkey. You only need to infuse a little of your own power to activate it, and it will teleport you directly into Gondor. It's reusable. If you find yourself in danger, activate it again, and it will return you to Isengard." Gandalf accepted the ring gratefully and slipped it onto the index finger of his left hand, beside the ring of fire he already wore. He even joked, "If I weren't an old man, that might look embarrassing. I hope Arwen won't be jealous. After all, you haven't been giving rings only to her." Dewey was at a loss for words. The comment struck an odd chord. He had a vague memory from his previous life of the actor who'd played Gandalf preferring blue-faced confidants to red-faced ones. It made the Gandalf before him feel oddly familiar and yet not the same, and Dewey's gaze must have betrayed that discomfort. Gandalf noticed Dewey's expression but had no time to examine it. After a brief farewell, he mounted Shadowfax, intending to activate the portkey and depart when a sharp, resonant cry split the air. A griffon patrolling high above circled and called out. Dewey and Gandalf looked up at the same instant. "Has Aslan found something?" Gandalf asked, sensing emotion in the griffon's cry, and paused before activating the ring. Dewey, gifted in legilimency, could read the griffon's thoughts directly. He frowned and peered toward the outer reaches of Isengard. "Aslan says a group is approaching from the direction of Rohan," he said. "They look like Rohirrim, and they're heading this way." Gandalf did not leave. "Gondor is in peril, and now Rohan is coming to Isengard. I fear Rohan may be in trouble as well." He was right. A dusty cavalry contingent from Rohan soon rode up, led by a man in his 30s. He dismounted, bowed deeply, and introduced himself. "Lord Duer, I am Folkred, cousin to King Thengel." We answered Gondor's call for aid, but now tens of thousands of orcs and Easterlings have invaded our eastern borders. We cannot spare forces to march to Gondor." He produced a sealed letter and presented it to Dewey. Dewey read it carefully, then raised his eyebrows in surprise. Gandalf leaned closer. "What does King Thengel say that startled you?" Dewey handed the letter back. "If I assist Rohan in defending against the invaders, King Thengel will cede to me the entire Gap of Rohan, including the Fords of Isen." Gandalf's surprise matched Dewey's. The Gap of Rohan, an open valley between the Misty and White Mountains, and the Fords of Isen were strategically vital. Control of that passage could cut Rohan and Gondor off from the west. That the Rohirrim would offer such a concession was extraordinary. Gandalf, however, made no move to interfere. It was Dewey's decision alone. Dewey considered for a moment, then looked at the leader of the Black Wildlings who had come with the Rohirrim. Since Dewey had subdued them, the Black Wildlings had mostly camped on the plains outside Isengard as a first line of defense. Dewey did not intend to leave Isengard to aid Rohan himself. He had to guard against any of Saruman's treachery, so he posed a choice to their leader. "Brog," Dewey said, "you've heard King Thengel's terms. This is your choice. If you are willing to send your people to help Rohan, the Gap of Rohan and the Fords of Isen will be your new territory, ceded by King Thengel. If you refuse, the matter ends here." Dewey knew the Black Wildlings had been a danger to Rohan before their submission, sometimes even reaching Edoras. If they and the Rohirrim joined forces, the combined strength might repel Mordor. He did not compel them. Unlike the settled folk of Hogsmeade or Bree, the Black Wildlings had kept a measure of autonomy, but he hoped Brog would agree. The Fords of Isen would provide a steady source of resources and security for his people, and aligning with the Rohirrim might finally bury centuries of mutual hatred. Brog hesitated. He did not want to risk his tribesmen's lives for the Rohirrim. Privately, he had wished Rohan would be crushed by Mordor. But the promise of secure lands for his people and a lasting future weighed heavily in his mind. After evident struggle, he squared his shoulders and met Dewey's eyes. "Lord, the Black Wildlings will aid Rohan," he said. "On the battlefield, though, we will answer to our own leaders, not theirs." Dewey smiled. He had expected this. Brog, as chief, genuinely cared for his people. He had submitted to Dewey for protection and was now willing to set aside old grievances for a chance at peace. Gandalf's expression softened in approval. The Rohirrim contingent, initially anxious, brightened. Though they had long despised the barbarians, the Black Wildlings' fighting strength had often been a thorn in their side. With them as allies, the Rohirrim felt hope. "Since you're willing to help," Dewey said, "I, as your lord, cannot remain idle." He produced the Horn of Victory and blew it. The blast rolled through Isengard. From the depths of the surrounding forest rose sounds like great wings and pounding hooves. Dozens of hippogriffs burst into the sky, circled, and answered the call by landing in front of the gathered crowd. The creatures dwarfed ordinary horses, over 3 meters tall, with wingspans of 6 meters, as large as small elephants. Dewey ran a hand over the flank of the lead hippogriff, then turned to Brog. "These can run on the ground and fly. I'm lending them to you for this battle, but they're proud creatures and won't accept just anyone. Come and try. Whoever can win their favor will ride them. The rest will not." The Black Wildlings' faces lit up, and even the Rohirrim looked envious. Dewey explained how to win a hippogriff's trust. "Choose one you like, stand about 2 meters away, and bow while holding eye contact. If it bows its head back, it recognizes you, and you may approach. If it does not bow, do not push it, retreat slowly. If you provoke it, it can kill you with its claws." Brog went first. He fixed his gaze on the lead hippogriff, the one Dewey had first bred and the only one with a name, Buckbeak. Brog stepped forward until Buckbeak pawed the ground and glared, warning him off. Brog stood his ground and bowed slowly, meeting the creature's stare. Buckbeak watched, then extended a foreleg and bowed his head in return. Dewey smiled. "Congratulations, Brog. Buckbeak recognizes you. You may touch him." Brog approached cautiously and stroked the pointed beak. Even as the most skilled rider in his tribe, mounting a beast over 3 meters tall took effort, but Brog managed. One by one, other warriors tried their luck. Some hippogriffs accepted them, others rejected them, and a few nearly slew their suitors with their claws before Dewey intervened. Those who succeeded mounted with jubilant cries. Those who failed retreated, bitter and envious. Then Dewey produced thousands of spider silk armors, light, comfortable, and tough enough to resist ordinary blades, woven in the style of Weathertop. He also distributed the secret weapons that Saruman had forged in the Orthanc armory. Within minutes, the Black Wildlings were fully armed and armored. Thus, a well-equipped Black Wildling force stood ready to ride to Rohan's aid. The Black Wildlings assembled quickly, forming a fully armed cavalry. Leading them was Chief Blogg, accompanied by a dozen of the tribe's strongest warriors, all mounted on hippogriffs. Because of the long journey and the unpredictability of battle, Dewey pulled out several boxes, expanded with the undetectable extension charm, and packed the bulk of the Black Wildling cavalry together with the Rohan contingent inside. Only a dozen Black Wildling riders who had bonded with hippogriffs remained, along with the leader of the relief force, the king's cousin, and they all mounted hippogriffs to fly to Edoras, the Rohan capital, as fast as they could to provide support. When asked why he hadn't used a portkey, Dewey explained that even if he drained himself dry of magic, he couldn't transport so many people and horses. Portkeys cost him magic, and each extra person or mount consumed an additional portion. A few hundred might be feasible, 10,000 was impossible. With the Black Wildlings and the Rohirrim gone, only Dewey remained in Isengard. Gandalf had already taken a portkey into Gondor when the Black Wildlings agreed to help, to organize Gondor's defenses against the Mordor invasion. Aslan, be on duty these next few days. Patrol constantly, watch the surroundings, and tell me immediately if you spot any enemies, Dewey said, stroking the griffin's head. Aslan was sharper than most beasts, almost human in intelligence, if not speech. He nodded, rubbed Dewey's hand, and launched into the sky, circling Isengard and using his keen eyes to watch for trouble. Dewey went back inside Orthanc, patted the three-headed wolf, and ordered, "Cerberus, stay alert. Someone might try to sneak in. Don't let anyone get near this place." Two of Cerberus's heads had been dozing. They stirred, the wolf rose, and all three heads let out a long guarding howl. "Good boy, I'll reward you with a cow later," Dewey said, patting each head. Cerberus's 6 eyes glittered, its tail thumped, and it took up a proud sentry post on the first floor, the 3 heads facing 3 directions in constant vigilance. Dewey climbed to the platform at the top of the tower and stared east, his brow tight with worry. Mordor's sudden invasion of Gondor and Rohan had taken him by surprise. Worse, he felt a deeper unease. Sauron's actions rarely had a single purpose. The Dark Lord was like a venomous snake, lurking patiently until the moment for a decisive strike. After his defeat in the War of the Last Alliance, he had hidden and rebuilt his strength for ages. Gandalf, Galadriel, and the others had missed his return until his exposure in Dol Guldur, after which he fled back to Mordor to gather power again. Sauron's strength had not fully recovered, so launching an outright war of conquest now made little sense. Dewey suspected this mobilization was aimed at something else, and the suspicion grew sharper since his soul's transformation after creating the Philosopher's Stone. He trusted instincts as much as Gandalf and the others did, and he meant to prepare. On the tower platform, he put on the ring and took his staff. With Orthanc's amplifying power behind him, he began to chant and cast Super Protego, Protego Totalum, Fortification Charm. Magic flared from his staff in a compound incantation, centered on Orthanc and spanning the circle of Isengard's outer wall. A white, netted dome rose up, a giant shell that enveloped the tower. Since the Philosopher's Stone had altered his soul and body, Dewey's magic had surged. His power now rivaled great wizards of old. But even with the ring and staff, casting a protective dome over all of Isengard drained him significantly. The result was worth it. The dome looked as thin as a cicada's wing, yet proved indestructible. Ordinary magic could not break it. Anyone attempting to force their way through would be destroyed instantly. Dewey had also modified the dome with a technique inspired by Gellert Grindelwald's improvements on Fiendfire, so those loyal or benevolent to him could pass through freely. When the wards were in place, Dewey produced the golden cup and summoned clear water. He took the Philosopher's Stone in his other hand and stirred it in the cup a few times. The water turned gem-red like wine. He drank it in one long gulp. Vitality and magic flooded back into him, replenishing what he had spent, and bringing his body to peak condition. The golden cup nourished his flesh, while the Philosopher's Stone restored his magic together. So used in combination, they prevented exhaustion and magical depletion. He put the cup away and looked at the ruby stone with a small smile. If Mordor had not struck Gondor and Rohan unexpectedly, he would already be in Weathertop's potion room, brewing his elixir of life. The Philosopher's Stone could not grant immortality outright, but it was the essential ingredient for the elixir. A single brew could extend life by 30 years, and continuous consumption could, in effect, grant unending life. More important still, Dewey's stone was perfect. Unlike Nicholas Flamel's, which granted unending life but not youth, Dewey's stone preserved eternal youth. The elixir made from it would keep one's body frozen at its current age. He had been waiting for the crisis in Isengard to pass before returning to Weathertop to brew the potion. He was not young, and he did not want to grow old waiting. Holding the stone, a new worry intruded. Could Mordor's sudden offensive be aimed at the Philosopher's Stone itself? The stone could restore a physical body. That had been why Voldemort had attempted to take the stone in Harry Potter's first year by possessing Quirrell. Sauron's situation was analogous. He depended on the One Ring and existed more as a spirit. In the Second Age, Sauron had seduced the Númenóreans, and when Númenor sank, he was punished. He lost his body and much of his power of shapeshifting. He relied on the One Ring to hold a corporeal form. Without it, he would be weakened, reduced to a shadow once more. The Philosopher's Stone offered another route to regaining a body before he could secure the One Ring. Dewey remembered that when he forged the stone, Sauron had tried to spy its location. Galadriel had stopped him in time, but Sauron's sight and wisdom were formidable. Even a glimpse might have revealed the stone's capabilities. The thought made Dewey's face darken. He had expected at worst a quarrel with Saruman for Isengard, but if ringwraiths, or Sauron himself, came hunting for the stone, he might be forced to abandon Isengard altogether. A small comfort came to him in the memory of the fireplace downstairs. If Sauron attacked, he could use the fireplace to call for aid from Lothlorien and Rivendell. With elves like Lady Galadriel, Elrond, and Glorfindel, the Lord of the Golden Flower, on the field, they had faced down Sauron before at Dol Guldur. There was no reason they could not help again. Still, Isengard felt short-staffed. Dewey took out the Horn of Victory, a gift from the blue wizard Romastamo, and blew hard. The sound wasn't thunderous, but the horn's call carried a long way. Far above, in the Golden Mountain, the dragon Smaug opened his eyes. He rose from his hoard and without hesitation tunneled through the dragon passage. In the Chamber of Secrets, the sleeping basilisk stirred, slithered through the pipes, and surfaced in the Black Lake. Startled Hogsmeade residents watched as Smaug burst out of the castle's vicinity, swooped down, and seized the basilisk with 2 claws. Remarkably, the enormous 80-foot basilisk did not thrash. It curled once around the dragon's leg, and together they flew southeast. The giant eagle Thorondor answered the call as well, winging toward Isengard even faster than Smaug. Only the great octopus kraken remained behind, keeping watch over the Black Lake and the castle's water defenses. 253. Reinforcements arrived from the sky. On Rohan's eastern border, a fierce, brutal battle raged. Tens of thousands of Mordor soldiers poured out from the Black Gate, swept through the dead marshes, and pushed straight for the Anduin. The attack had come so suddenly that the defensive forces stationed along the river were inadequate. Despite their desperate resistance, the Rohirrim were overwhelmed by sheer numbers and soon found themselves at a disadvantage. Seeing the situation, the Rohan commander destroyed the bridge spanning the river to slow the enemy's advance. Mordor, however, had anticipated this. Countless boats were ready, and under a hail of Rohirrim arrows, the Orcs poured across the Anduin. There were heavy losses, many Orcs were killed, but still the tide could not be stopped. Those who reached the far bank pressed the defenders back, and as more Mordor troops landed, the Rohirrim were forced into retreat. They fell back to the Entwash, Rohan's second defensive line. Once across to the west bank, they destroyed the bridge and set their positions. Beyond the Entwash lay a wide-open plain. If Mordor crossed it, Edoras itself would be vulnerable. So Rohan had concentrated most of its forces here, determined to make a stand. King Thengel himself arrived at the Entwash to organize the defense, but the suddenness of Mordor's assault meant many forces across the land could not reach them in time. Even at the Entwash, the Rohirrim were outnumbered. Mordor's army surged to the opposite bank. With a blast of horns, they set about another crossing by boat. Where the Entwash was shallower, huge trolls waded into the water and braced long planks to form makeshift bridges so the orcs could march straight across. "Quick, aim for the trolls," King Thengel cried. The Rohirrim loosed arrows, but the trolls' thick hides shrugged them off. Only when massive ballistae were brought up and fired at their heads did some trolls fall, pierced through skull and drowning in the current. Thengel himself loosed an arrow into a troll's eye. The beast howled, pitched a plank and the orcs upon it into the water, and nearby trolls supporting other crossings were knocked off balance and swept away. Still, Mordor did not stop. They kept coming, overwhelming the crossing points. "Your Majesty, retreat! Mordor's numbers are too great. We can't hold them," a messenger shouted, having just cut down an orc with his sword. Thengel hacked through an Uruk-hai with his greatsword, but shook his head, eyes hard. "Behind us is Edoras. If we retreat, we lose everything. Mordor will take our capital. Rohan will be destroyed." Edoras had little in the way of walls or defenses. Countless citizens and the king's family were inside. As king, Thengel could not bear the thought of abandoning them. He looked west, clinging to one hope, the wizard from Isengard. Perhaps Duir would arrive and turn the day. But waves of Mordor soldiers still poured over the Entwash, and his forces thinned. Just then, a dozen piercing cries cut across the battlefield from high above. Everyone looked up. In an instant, more than a dozen hippogriffs, huge, half-eagle, half-horse beasts, plunged from the sky like bolts of lightning. Their wings and bodies plowed through the Mordor lines, claws like iron hooks ripping trolls free and hurling them aside. On their backs rode the black wildlings, archers loose with deadly precision, picking off orcs and easterlings. The sudden arrival of the hippogriffs changed everything. From the air, the black wildlings could target Mordor commanders, and chaos erupted among the invaders. Mordor's archers peppered the sky, but ordinary arrows did no harm to the beasts. "Your Majesty, it's me, Folkred. I'm here," shouted Folkred as he rode in on a hippogriff, a black wildling warrior ahead of him. The wildling's sharp eyes caught an orc sneaking toward the king, and he drew an arrow, killing it before it could strike. Folkred nearly drew his sword, startled, thinking the wildling had meant to shoot Thengel. The wildling snorted, guided his beast down to drop Folkred safely to the ground, then soared back up to rejoin the fight. "Folkred, what news? Has Wizard Duir come?" Thengel asked, hope flaring. Folkred shook his head. "No, Your Majesty. Duir has not come himself. He sent the black wildlings to aid Rohan." Thengel's hope faltered. He had hoped Duir would arrive astride a great dragon and end the threat. "And the reinforcements? Is that all?" Folkred's face brightened. "Not at all. Over 10,000 fully equipped black wildling elites came with them." Thengel turned his head toward the western plain, suddenly alert. Before Folkred could answer further, the black wildling riders aboard the hippogriffs hurled heavy boxes to the ground. The boxes struck the earth and, to the astonishment of both orcs and men, swelled to many times their original size and popped open. Mounted black wildling warriors and warhorses poured forth and charged like a spear thrust into the enemy ranks. Clad in armor woven of spider silk, soft and light yet nearly impervious to ordinary blades, the black wildling warriors were unstoppable. Mordor arrows and swords glanced off them as they cut through the ranks. The hippogriffs themselves tore trolls from the battle, flew high, and dropped them into the midst of the Mordor host, smashing them and crushing many orcs and easterlings beneath. Seeing this, Thengel ordered an immediate assault. On the airfield of battle, Chief Blog of the Black Wildlings split his riders. Half were to prevent more crossings at the Entwash, destroying boats and hastily made bridges and cutting off the invaders' retreat. The other half, led by Blog himself, struck at the rear of Mordor's forces, aiming for their command post. The Mordor generals were thrown into disarray. Arrows rained skyward, doing little good. On the ground, the black wildling warriors, confident in their silk armor, poured into the enemy and slashed them down, while the Rohirrim, led by King Thengel, attacked the flanks. Panic set in. Mordor troops began to fall back. Their boats and bridges, however, were not left intact. Hippogriffs seized them, carried them high, and smashed them to splinters. With the crossings destroyed and retreat cut off, the Mordor soldiers' morale collapsed. They were slaughtered as they attempted to flee. Those who leapt into the river were swept away by the current. Chief Blog himself shot down Mordor's general and cut down his banner. Without a leader, the army dissolved, scattering eastward. The Ontwash blocked any swift pursuit, but the victory was decisive enough. Nearly half of Mordor's invading force had been annihilated. Rohan and the Black Wildlings cheered. The Rohirrim, who had long regarded the Black Wildlings as savage, now saw them in a new light. When Chief Blog finally descended and dismounted, King Thengel stepped forward and, with heartfelt solemnity, extended his thanks. Chief Blog, Rohan owes you a great debt. We will remember this day. The Black Wildlings and the Rohirrim shall live in peace. No more wars between us. Blog's hard gaze met the king's sincerity. After a beat, he took Thengel's hand and shook it. The centuries-old hostility between their peoples, at least for the moment, was healed. Their celebration was cut short. The sky darkened. The hippogriffs grew restless, uneasy even under their riders' hands. King Thengel and Chief Blog looked up with mounting alarm. Black clouds blotted out the light, and a roar shook the earth. From the storm a black giant unfurled, so vast it seemed a kilometer long, its presence bringing an instant chill, as if winter had fallen wherever it passed. 254. The army is on the verge of Isengard. The appearance of the dragon sent everyone into panic. Horses froze in terror or bolted in every direction. Chief Brog of the Black Wildlings wore a look of pure fear. He had never seen anything so vast. Even Smaug, whom he had once laid eyes on, seemed small in comparison. For a moment it felt as if despair had swallowed them all. The black dragon, however, did not bother to harry them. It flew straight over their heads, bringing wind and snow in its wake, and headed west. Relief barely had time to stir when dozens of wyverns, each tens of meters long, followed close behind. They made no move to attack, but their presence cast a dark shadow over the camp. King Thengel felt a chill in his bones as he watched them go. He turned to Brog beside him. "Are those dragons heading for Isengard?" he asked. Brog's face tightened. The beasts had come from Mordor and were pointed squarely at Isengard. He had the same sick premonition. The lead black dragon dwarfed even Smaug, and faint shapes were visible on the backs of several of the others. Could Lord Duir stand against them? Brog barked orders at the Black Wildlings, calling his warriors to muster. Thengel, watching, guessed Brog's intent. "Chief Brog, are you planning to return and give aid?" Brog nodded. "Lord Duir and Isengard are threatened. As his allies, we must go to his defense." Thengel's eyes widened. "But the dragon we saw, at least 1,000 meters long. If you turn back now, you'll be committing suicide." He did not want these new allies, people who had just helped them, to be thrown away. Brog heard him, but did not falter. "We swore fealty to Lord Duir. We cannot stand by while he is attacked. Your Majesty, pursue the retreating armies of Mordor. We will hurry back to defend our lord." He ordered the Black Wildlings into their transport boxes and readied to return at top speed. Folkred, Thengel's cousin and third marshal of Rohan's cavalry, hurried forward. "Your Majesty, they are leaving. What shall we do?" Thengel paused, weighing the situation. "We cannot forget Isengard's aid," he said at last. "The armies of Mordor have been routed and no longer pose an immediate threat. Folkred, take half the army and press east in pursuit. Strive to annihilate them before they cross the Anduin. I will take the other half west to aid Isengard." Folkred objected fiercely. "Your Majesty, Isengard is under dragon attack. It is far too dangerous for you to go. Let me lead the force to Isengard while you finish off the retreating enemy." Thengel would not be dissuaded. Seeing he could not persuade the king, Folkred fell silent. Thengel turned to Brog. "Chief, Rohan owes Isengard its thanks. I will lead half the cavalry to your aid. Can your boxes take more men? If not, we will ride." Brog, surprised by the king's courage, reconsidered. In Brog's mind, their aid to Rohan had been a transaction for living territory. Rohan had no real obligation to risk men for Isengard. Yet the king's resolve impressed him. He ordered his warriors to squeeze together and cleared out a transport box to carry the Rohirrim. He handed it to Thengel, who would accompany it to Isengard, and Brog offered a hippogriff ride to the king. Thangel looked at the box, crammed with thousands of cavalry, and marveled at Duir's magic. If Rowan had such boxes, troop movements would be trivial. Above Orthanc, Duir had already seen the dark clouds gathering in the east and felt a heaviness settle over him. Aslan the Griffin, on patrol, screamed a sharp alarm. Its tone said it had seen a predator. Something terrible rode within the rolling storm. A monstrous black dragon's head burst from the clouds and breathed an ice-like mist toward Isengard. The cold struck the invisible dome that protected the tower, frosting it into a shimmering crystalline sheen. The temperature plunged and frost silvered the trees and grass. Inside the dome, Duir's breath came out white. He stared up at the dragon and felt his heart drop. A frost dragon? And nearly 10 times the size of Smaug, this creature radiated an ancient, terrible power, far beyond anything Duir had expected. He felt small beneath its gaze. Even more unsettling, Duir's keen eyes picked out a figure on the dragon's back, Saruman. The traitor saw Duir, smiled, and his voice boomed across the wind. "Duir, today I will take back all I've lost. Are you ready for the fire of my revenge?" Duir sneered. "Saruman, do you think that because you have found a dragon, you have the upper hand?" "Is that so?" Saruman snorted and raised his staff. Dozens of wyverns streamed from the clouds and ringed Isengard. On the backs of the 8 lead black wyverns sat 8 ringwraiths, their dark presence chilling the air. "Wizard, hand over the Philosopher's Stone you forged. My master promises to give you everything you desire," intoned the Witch King of Angmar. Duir's face remained calm, but his hand slid for the Philosopher's Stone. He dangled it before them as if to taunt. "Sauron wants this?" Greed lit the ringwraiths' unseen faces. The stone could restore Sauron's body and provide hosts for spirits. The temptation was plain. Saruman, too, saw the jewel for what it was and felt a bitter envy that Duir had made such a thing. "Give it to me," the Witch King demanded. Duir smiled and slipped the stone away. "You want it? Then kill Saruman. If you do, I might consider giving it to Sauron. I could even tell him how to make one himself. Surely a thing made by you would be better than one made by strangers, would it not?" The ringwraiths fell silent, glancing at Saruman as if weighing the offer. Saruman answered with a curse. "Fools, he's deceiving you. Attack at once. Capture him and the stone will be ours." His gaze fixed on Duir, cold as ice. "Duir, you sow discord, but you will see whether you can do anything about it. Today you will die under my dragons." With a cry, a wave of wyverns dived. Duir watched without panic. One charging wyvern struck the dome, and to the horror of those outside, the dome offered no visible resistance. The creature passed through, but its cry would have haunted them all. Flames and frost licked its wings into ash, its body burned, and it crashed wounded. The other wyverns faltered, wary of the dome. Duir lifted his staff and intoned a killing curse, "Avada Kedavra," and the wounded wyvern died. A black, misty spirit burst from its corpse and hurtled toward the dome, exploding against the enchantment. Saruman's face darkened. He urged the frost dragon to breathe again, and the dome gathered a new rime under the cold. Saruman hurled fireballs at the barrier. The ringwraiths poured out dark spells. The dome shuddered under the onslaught. "Humph, you think numbers make you strong? I'll call more," Duir answered. He put to his lips the horn of victory and blew. The sound was a blade of sound, so piercing that Saruman and his allies recoiled as if assaulted by a storm. From the misty mountains behind Isengard came a great roar. Dragons answered the horn. They swept out of the peaks, streaked to Isengard, and turned their flaming breath against the attacking beasts. The sudden arrival of the dragons took Saruman and his followers completely by surprise. The newcomers poured dragon fire down on Saruman's dark dragons at once. Saruman's beasts were cold dragons, unable to breathe flame and without even the frost dragon's ability to blast freezing air, relying purely on claws, teeth, and brute strength. Against the dragons bred by Dewey, however, they were at a disadvantage. The two sides tangled in the skies. The visiting dragons seized the initiative, shredding dark dragons with teeth and talons while blazing dragon fire to burn them. The dark dragons screamed in agony and were helpless. Their long necks were bitten through, their bodies torn wide, dragon blood spattering the air. For a time, dark dragons fell from the heavens in a steady rain. The attackers were suffering too. The dark dragons ridden by the 8 ringwraiths were actually wyverns, crossbred from dragons and fell beasts. Though incapable of fire or frost breath, they inherited the fell beast's ability to emit terrifying, disorienting shrieks. Under that sonic onslaught, the attacking dragons became dazed and wavered in mid-air as if about to fall. The wyverns seized those moments to clamp onto necks and pin opponents. The ringwraiths themselves ghosted across backs, stabbing highly poisonous morgul blades into dragon chests. A dragon would utter a single mournful cry and then go silent, tumbling away in a death dive. In short order, both sides had taken losses. More than a dozen dragons and dark dragons lay broken on the ground. Dewey and Saruman watched in pained anger, Saruman more than most. He had not expected Dewey to have bred wyverns, and to see more of his own beasts falling wounded made him bitter. Worse, most of Saruman's dark dragons were cold dragons, while Dewey had true, fire-breathing dragons. The balance of power in Saruman's once proud dark dragon legion had been sharply reduced. From the top of Orthanc, Dewey, protected by the dome, felt the ringwraith's deafening cries drag his dragons off balance. He snatched up the horn of victory and blew with all his strength. The horn's blast sent a charge through his dragons, exciting and steadying them. The dark dragons grew unsettled, and the wyvern's dizzying shrieks were blunted. The tide turned at once. Dewey's dragons chased, breathed, and tore, pressing the dark dragon's back. Saruman winced at the horn sound, furious. Glommer, the frost dragon beneath him, answered his command and unleashed its most potent frost breath. The dome over Isengard stiffened and froze, looking for a moment like glass about to crack. Saruman raised his staff and called lightning. Under the combined assault of frost and storm, the dome began to spider with fissures, ice about to shatter. Seeing the shelter he had labored to raise threatened, Dewey grew grim. He drew the golden bow gifted by the blue wizard Moreda, knocked a silver arrow, took careful aim at Saruman atop the dragon, and loosed. The silver arrow raced faster than sound, a streak with a thunderous boom that reached Saruman before he could finish speaking. But Saruman had been ready. One hand still summoned lightning. With the other, he caught the arrow as if expecting it. He sneered at the metal shaft in his palm. "Morda gave you this bow and arrow? Did he not tell you I once used them myself?" Dewey only smiled and replied, "Explode." A runic sigil at the arrow's tip flared. With a violent detonation, the thunderbolt explosion curse, amplified beyond normal, the blast hurled Saruman off the dragon and interrupted Glommer's frost breath. The frost dragon staggered, nearly brought to its knees. The cracked dome closed again as quickly as it had opened. Saruman tumbled from the dragon's back, but was snatched up by another dark dragon before he could hit the ground. He survived, robes shredded and body lacerated, but humiliation and pain darkened his face. "Glommer, kill those dragons first. Then we will smash his turtle shell," he spat. Glommer obeyed. The frost dragon poured extreme cold into the sky. Against that frost, the visiting dragons were like mice before an elephant. One dragon tried to meet flame with flame, but Glommer's cold snuffed the blaze and froze the creature solid. It plummeted as a shattered statue. The rest scattered in panic, offering little opposition. It looked as if Dewey's force would be driven back and wiped out when a roar came from the west. A great golden dragon swept up from a distant ridge, a huge green serpent coiled about one leg, and a massive eagle followed above. Smaug had arrived. Saruman sneered, contemptuous. "Another dragon? Glommer is an ancient dragon, born in the First Age. A dragon born in the Third Age is only a stronger ant." "Glommer, kill the golden dragon," he ordered. The frost dragon abandoned the hunt and hurled itself at Smaug. Smaug did not flinch. Though far smaller, he met the charge with burning ferocity. A heartbeat before they collided, both opened their throats, scorching flame against numbing frost. Fire and ice clashed in a deafening impact. Smaug's flames, hot enough to threaten even the ring, were visibly being pushed back by Glommer's terrible cold. Saruman's face lit with triumph. He expected to see Smaug frozen solid in the next instant. Then the serpent, Herpo the basilisk, shifted. Coiled around Smaug's leg, the basilisk slid up over the golden hide, came about the dragon's neck, and wedged its head between the horns on Smaug's skull. Smaug made no resisting move. The basilisk uncurled its eyelids and fixed its orange-yellow gaze upon Glommer. The frost dragon reeled as if struck. It gave a pained wail and smashed through a distant hill outside Isengard, collapsing it as it fell. "My dragon!" Saruman cried, aghast. Smaug surged toward where Glommer had crashed and blasted the frost-wounded beast with flame, hoping to finish it. But then the iron crown on Glommer's brow flared with a malevolent darkness. A shadowy figure swam across the frost dragon's pupils, like webbing across its sight, and its eyes turned black and evil. Smaug halted, sensing instant danger. The frost dragon hauled itself free of the rubbled hill, now wholly changed. Dark aura poured off it. Its eyes, veiled in a black mist surface, glowed with malignant hunger. The basilisk's glare, once so deadly, skittered across that black layer and found purchase nowhere. Instead, the frost dragon regarded Smaug with calculating interest. A golden dragon with a great serpent whose eyes can fell beasts. Unexpected, but welcome, it rumbled. Give up your pointless resistance. My dark army needs warriors like you. Sauron, Smaug hissed, the name snapping into place. He understood at once who had taken Glommer. The frost dragon's look sharpened into appreciation. Smaug the Golden, it purred, in a voice oily with promise. I know you are ensnared by the oath curse imposed on you. Submit to me, and I will lift it. I will restore your freedom and grant you all the treasures of Mordor. What say you? Smaug snarled. If you want submission, why should I trade one master for another? That is not how it shall be, the frost dragon replied. Submit, and I will not chain you. You will be my lieutenant, my chief warrior. Your ancestor in Calagon once stood in such a station. No more humiliation as a bound mount. Temptation flickered across Smaug's face, but he demanded proof. Can you truly break the oath, or is this trickery? The frost dragon's arrogance blossomed. It is no trick. The oath is bound to your soul, yes, but I am a master of soul work. I can isolate the oath upon a fragment of your soul and then sever that fragment. Freed thus, the oath will no longer bind you. Upon hearing the frost dragon's offer, Smaug looked tempted, but he still hesitated. If I agree, he said, my current master will find out, and the oath will turn against me. That will not be a problem, the frost dragon replied. Do not resist. I will inject some of my power into you now. It will temporarily shield you from the oath. When we return to Mordor, I will remove the curse entirely. The frost dragon closed in. The iron crown embedded on its brow radiated a dark aura, the power of Sauron coiling in the air, ready to pour into Smaug the moment it touched him. Smaug, however, answered with flame. He unleashed his fiercest dragonfire in a single scorching gout that caught the frost dragon full in the head. The cold scales hissed and steamed. The crown flared a molten red under the heat. The frost dragon screamed as its icy armor melted like snow beneath a blaze. Pain seared through it. Scrambling, it sprayed a blast of numbing cold to douse the flames, then fixed Smaug with a look full of fury and malice. Damn you, Smaug, it snarled. How dare you? I will make you wish you were dead. Smaug laughed as he flew away toward Isengard. That Dark Lord isn't very clever, he said aloud to the basilisk coiled about his neck. He actually believed I'd betray my master? How stupid. The basilisk Herpo hissed in agreement, eyes narrowing. Smaug smirked. Exactly. I lie on a mountain of gold, eat well, sleep well. Who in their right mind would give that up to serve a ghost? Outside Isengard, Smaug spewed dragonfire into the ranks of ringwraiths, wyverns, and Saruman himself. Herpo, eyes wide and deadly, fixed its gaze on the mounts and riders below. Many wyverns were burned or stone-burned outright under its glare. Giant eagle Thorondor dove through the chaos, crushing a wyvern with his massive body and tearing it apart with bone-cracking talons. Wyverns fell from the sky in a cascade. The ground became cluttered with their carcasses. Riders were dismounted as wyverns dropped dead beneath them. Smaug did not tarry. After a frenzied bout of flame, he plunged through the protective dome before the frost dragon could arrive. The other dragons followed, diving into the shelter and sealing the dome against the forces outside. Thorondor snatched another wyvern and bore it into the dome. The moment the mount passed the barrier, its aura weakened, and the eagle finished it with a merciless strike, hurling the corpse to the ground. Smaug landed and grinned up at the tower where Dewey stood. Master, we weren't late, were we? He called. Herpo flicked its tongue and hissed. Thorondor circled above in a protective watch. Dewey shook his head with a smile. No, you arrived just in time. Dewey's enhanced hearing had caught the entire exchange between the frost dragon and Smaug. He looked at Smaug, then asked with a light tease, Sauron promised to help remove your oath. Why refuse? Don't you want your freedom? Smaug glanced warily at Dewey, then relaxed when he saw no anger. Master, rest assured, I would never betray you, he blustered. I have my gold, my food, my comfort. I'd be a fool to take orders from Sauron and slave away for a body he may never regain. Besides, you have that treasure that makes stones into gold. You can give me more gold whenever you want. Dewey, by the faintest twitch of expression, read Smaug's greed in full, legitimacy peeling back the dragon's mind like a book. He rolled his eyes. I think that last sentence was the real reason. Smaug laughed, proud and foolish. Heh, it's all the same. I, Smaug, will never betray you, master. The brief levity vanished as the frost dragon returned, wrathful. It sprayed a wave of extreme cold at the dome. Saruman raised his staff and called lightning from the sky to strike the barrier. The ringwraiths, wielding the dark power of their 9 rings, added a concentrated assault. Under that relentless, densely layered onslaught, the dome cracked like thin ice. Dewey poured his strength into holding it, but the fissures multiplied. With a final resonant fracture, the dome shattered and collapsed into glittering fragments. Dewey, hand over the gem you created, the frost dragon commanded, locking its eyes on Dew with ravenous certainty. I know you can teleport, but don't try to flee or summon help. Gondor and Rohan are under attack, and my armies harass Lothlorien and Rivendell. They are too occupied to come to you. Hearing that Lothlorien and Rivendell were also under assault made Dewey's heart skip, but he forced himself calm. Galadriel and Celeborn stood in Lothlorien, Elrond and Glorfindel in Rivendell. The elves could hold their own against Sauron's troops. What chilled him was the scale of the conspiracy. Sauron had arranged all of this to seize the Philosopher's Stone. He drew the stone from his robes and sneered. You want to use the Philosopher's Stone to restore your body? At the sight of the gem, the frost dragon's eyes gleamed with greedy fire. Since you guessed it, hand it over obediently. For that stone I might spare your life. Dewey palm locked the Philosopher's Stone with a portkey charm. It vanished in an instant. The frost dragon howled in shock and fury. Where did it go? Where did you send it? Dewey didn't answer. He acted. Avada Kedavra. The frost dragon reacted by exhaling a wall of solid ice to intercept the killing curse. The curse slammed into the ice and shattered the wall to splinters. Dewyer, it hissed, you have enraged me. I had thought to make you my chief lieutenant. Now I will kill you, imprison your soul, and make you burn in hellfire forever. It loosed a blast of blade cold toward Dewey. Dewey apparated to the back of a passing wyvern. A sword of blazing fire appeared in his hand. With a single, brutal stroke, he cleaved the wyvern's long neck as if slicing soft tofu. Wind blades and searing flame deepened the wound. The wyvern let out a tortured wail and tore down. Dewey was gone from its back a heartbeat later, reappearing on another wyvern as he continued the duel. The frost dragon retaliated, hurling its cold at him. Dewey inhaled sharply. The ring he wore spun into a shield and deflected the freeze. He apparated away again before his blood could ice. The wyvern he had struck but not killed was frozen solid and dropped like a block of glass. In midair, Dewey teleported to land on the frost dragon's back. The dragon flipped and lunged, jaws snapping for him. Dewey vanished in the instant before the bite closed, rematerializing safely on the ground. He danced between teleports and strikes, skirmishing with the frost dragon and fending off ringwraith assaults. Smaug clashed with Saruman, Herpo's petrifying gaze forcing the wizard to keep his eyes closed and giving the dragon the advantage. Thorondor, Griffin Aslan, the three-headed wolf Cerberus, and the other dragons took on the wyverns and ringwraiths. Thorondor's wingspan had swelled to 50 meters. Wyverns that could not breathe fire were easy prey for him. Griffin Aslan used its swift, agile flight to interfere between riders and beasts. Cerberus sprayed flames and venom, wrestling dismounted ringwraiths. Isengard became a battlefield. Under the frost dragon's ravaging cold, Orthanc froze over. The land around it fell into an immediate winter, the temperature plunging below zero. Then a clamor arrived from the horizon. The black wildlings, mounted on hippogriffs, swept back toward the tower, and with them came reinforcements from Rohan. King Thengel rode among them. Seeing the desperate scene at Isengard, both the wildlings and the Rohirrim took a breath and committed themselves. They opened their space chests and released fresh black wildling warriors and Rohan cavalry into the fray. Dewey stared at the newcomers with surprise and a twitch of unease. Why had they returned so quickly? And they had brought the Rohan cavalry with them. Their arrival did not relieve him. Instead, it sent a cold prickle through his mind. Had they been brought only to be thrown away as cannon fodder? For Isengard, for Lord Dewey, roared Chief Blog of the Black Wildlings. Arrows rained from their ranks toward the Frost Dragon, Saruman, the Ringwraiths, and the Wyverns. The storm of shafts washed over the dragon's hide and the armored riders alike, but the missiles simply glanced off. Not a single arrow pierced hardened scales. The assault drew the Frost Dragon's contemptuous gaze. It saw the fighters like a swarm of ants and blew a casual, overwhelming blast of cold at the wildlings and Rohirrim to sweep them aside. Terror and despair spread over those who faced that freezing wave. In an instant, Dewey flashed before them, throwing up a vast protective barrier that took the brunt of the cold and shielded the troops behind it. Even so, everyone beneath the dome felt the bone-chilling cold bite into them. 257. Human power. The ring of power in Dewey's hand became a stout, unyielding shield, protecting him, the black wildlings behind him, and the Rohan cavalry. While forcing the ring to hold against the Frost Dragon's bitter breath, he asked, puzzled, "Why did you come back?" Chief Brog of the Black Wildlings, watching Dewey strain to shelter them, immediately looked ashamed and uneasy. "Lord Dewey, we routed Mordor's armies at the Ontwash crossing. When we saw a dragon attacking Isengard, we returned to help. King Thengel brought half the cavalry with him. Are we just getting in the way?" Brog had not thought through the consequences. He had assumed that when Isengard was imperiled, his duty demanded he return. The reality, however, was brutal. They could not even wound the weakest fell beast, let alone the Frost Dragon or Saruman. Dewey had been forced to protect them. Chief Brog felt they had not only been useless, but had become a burden. Dewey did not see it that way. He was moved that the Black Wildlings and the King of Rohan had risked themselves to come to his aid. No group of ants is truly powerless. 10,000 armed, trained warriors could change a battle. He tossed the golden bow to Brog and pulled a quiver from his spatial pouch. This golden bow never misses. The quiver holds hundreds of mithril arrows that can pierce dragon scales. Use them. These mithril arrows were replicas of the 3 silver arrows the blue wizard Morda had once given him, highly penetrative and carved with runes of explosive force. The original 3 had already been spent in past fights. 1 blasted Saruman, 1 felled a Ringwraith's fell beast, and 1 had been frozen mid-flight by the Frost Dragon's breath. Brog caught the bow and quiver, amazed and honored. Dewey handed the white horn of victory to King Thengel, standing nearby. "King Thengel, thank you for coming. Blow this horn to raise our courage and unnerve the enemy. Use it to distract them." Thengel took the horn solemnly. He knew they could not change the heart of the battle with their numbers alone. To assist from the flank and draw attention would be invaluable. Dewey swept his hand and summoned Fiendfire. The ghostly blue flames surged forward, spreading against the wind toward the assembled warriors. At first, those in the ranks panicked, thinking the fire would consume them, but the flames caused no pain. They were protective for Dewey's allies and murderous to foes. Warriors of the Black Wildlings and of Rohan. Dewey's voice rolled over them. "This fire protects us and burns our enemies. Plunge the tips of your arrows into it, then shoot." Hesitant at first, the wildlings and Rohirrim obeyed. The Fiendfire licked along the shafts, transforming their arrows into burning, blue-flamed projectiles, but no one felt heat. King Thengel blew the horn of victory with all his might. The blast steadied the shaken warriors and turned fear into resolve. Against the Frost Dragon, they felt courage instead of dread. At Dewey's signal, thousands of arrows streaked through the sky, flaming with Fiendfire, aimed at the Frost Dragon, the fell beasts, Saruman, the Ringwraiths. Even the Frost Dragon hesitated. Fiendfire was a dangerous substance. It responded by spewing torrents of extreme cold at the incoming volley. The dragon's cold could freeze volcanoes, yet Fiendfire was no ordinary fire. It was the fire of annihilation. Cold could not snuff it, and fire could not warm ice. The clash became one of opposing absolutes. Ultimately, sheer volume worked in the dragon's favor over the direct clash, and Fiendfire was held back from reaching the frost dragon. But the other fell beasts were not so fortunate. The Fiendfire arrows could not pierce every scale, but when they landed, the beasts burned like grass set to torch. Fell beast after fell beast erupted into fire, screeching and clawing at the air. Some plummeted toward the Eisen River, trying vainly to douse themselves. Most were consumed. The Ringwraith's mounts fared no better. Chief Brog, gripping the golden bow Dwyer had given him, drew mithril after mithril, loosing them in a relentless rain. The golden bow's uncanny aim and Brog's surprising skill sent several arrows exploding on contact, blasting Ringwraiths and fell beasts alike. Many struck the beast's eyes. The ensuing detonations tore heads off dragons and sent others spinning into the void. Under the Fiendfire's onslaught and Brog's mithril shots, Mordor's fell flying beasts thinned rapidly. The Ringwraiths and Saruman were pushed onto the defensive, dodging and resisting the ceaseless hail. For a time, the tide turned. Dwyer allowed himself a tight smile. Victory was not the work of one man alone. If he had stood isolated, he could not have achieved this. Across the field, Saruman watched his carefully bred fell beasts burn and scatter, and felt both despair and fury. He wished to whip storms and lightning upon the mortals, but Smaug watched him with baleful attention and kept a distance, ambushing instead with blasts of fire. King Thengil's relentless horn added to Saruman's rage and discomfort, and Chief Brog's long-range archery, peppering him with exploding mithril bolts, halted his concentration. The frost dragon's eyes narrowed, full of murderous wrath. It hated these ants who now inflicted heavy losses. Dwyer, you protect these mortals, then I will wipe them from the sky. The dragon leapt into the clouds and began to twist within them, chanting in the old draconic tongue. The air went thin and high-pitched. Suddenly, huge, meter-wide hailstones began to plummet like falling moons. People gasped at the sight, each stone a meteor, destined to crush and shred. Protego Maxima! Dwyer threw up a colossal dome. It rose like an enormous umbrella, shielding everyone beneath from the first impact. Stone after stone slammed into the barrier, sending ripples across its surface. Dwyer clamped himself under it and gritted his teeth. The assault felt like thousands of hammer blows. The hailstones outside ripped the earth, gouged pits, collapsed walls, and snapped trees. Dragons and giant eagles that could not escape were battered. Some lost wings or were knocked unconscious and fell. Saruman and his allies scrambled for defense as the landscape around Isengard became a blasted moonscape. Only Orthanc stood untouched amid the devastation. Dwyer's eyes lit at the sight of the intact tower. "Everyone, take shelter inside Orthanc," he shouted. The black wildlings and the Rowan cavalry surged toward the tower. A Rowan soldier looked up, face draining of blood. The sky," he stammered. Above them the frost dragon reappeared, clutching a gargantuan iceberg the size of a hillside, its crystalline surface gleaming, great icicles like fangs. The dragon let out a savage grin, flexed its claws, and released the ice. It plummeted, tearing the air into a sonic boom. If it struck, Isengard would be leveled. Saruman swore, leapt onto the last fell beast, and fled Isengard as if his life depended on escape. Dwyer watched the falling mass with tight features. His strongest shield would not hold against that impact long enough to save everyone. He had no confidence he could stop it from shattering his barrier. The only direct option was to apparate away, but around him stood terrified, hopeful faces. He hesitated. The crown of wisdom on his head spun as if searching for a solution. In a single instant, Dwyer apparated to Smaug's back high in the sky, planted his staff with both hands, and poured every ounce of power he had into a single spell. Bombarda Maxima! A blinding column of force shot upward and struck the iceberg. There was no thunderous crack, only a terrifying, suffocating silence, and then the ice detonated into a hurricane of shattered crystal. A circular shockwave rolled outward like a giant invisible palm, shearing through cloud and mist and scattering the threat into 1,000 glittering pieces. Everyone below stared up at the sky, hope swelling in their chests after the violent explosion. That hope died a heartbeat later when the iceberg reappeared from the smoke. Dewey's full-power strike had shattered only the lower half. The much larger upper portion hung untouched. The frost dragon had refrozen the mass with its blasted cold, an ice of unbelievable hardness and temperature. Dewey's exploding curse had only bought a breath of time. The iceberg paused for a second, then resumed its plunge toward Isengard. On the ground, the black wildlings and the Rohan cavalry went pale with despair. On Smaug's back, Dewey refused to give up. Cushioning charm, Protego totalum, super Protego, solid as gold, he chanted, throwing constant spells to slow the fall. He opened the ring of power in his hand and unleashed it, forming the largest shield anyone had ever seen. A dome that enclosed the black wildlings, the Rohan soldiers, the giant eagle Thorondor, the griffin Aslan, the three-headed wolf Cerberus, and Smaug himself. All the magic stored in the ring poured out to maintain the shield. Dewey stood on Smaug's back at the top of the dome, one hand up as if holding the sky, ready to take the iceberg's first impact. For a moment, the descent seemed to slow. The frost dragon, however, dove without mercy, blasting searing cold onto the ice to speed it up and pile more weight upon it. One protective barrier after another cracked under the pressure. The iceberg finally struck Dewey's shield like a planet colliding with a world. Ice detonated in every direction. Shards rained for kilometers, and the air froze solid. A circular shockwave became a storm that leveled trees and shattered boulders in distant foothills. Dewey felt the impact through the shield. Pain hit him like a blow to the bones. Smaug's wings could not keep him aloft against the added weight. Dragon and rider began to fall. The dome itself splintered and buckled like a deformed shell until, with a last keening crack, it shattered completely. The iceberg, still immense, plummeted toward Isengard, the pinnacle of Orthanc collapsing into it as stone and ice exploded outward. Flying beasts, eagle, griffin, hippogriff, dragon, cried out and were hurled from the sky by the blast. "Is this the end for us?" Chief Blog of the Black Wildlings thought, staring at the falling mass. King Thengel of Rohan, though stunned by terror, steadied himself long enough to glance back at his men with regret. Many closed their eyes, accepting oblivion. Then a new power erupted from the back of the falling Smaug, and the world around them fell strangely silent. The suspended warriors who had braced for death opened their eyes. Gravity itself seemed to stutter. Ice and rubble hung motionless, slowly turning. The animals and dragons were frozen in midair. Even the iceberg had halted, balanced just where it had struck Orthanc, and shattered the 4 polyhedral pillars at the summit. Above Smaug, a mass of black energy seethed. It was neither smoke nor cloud, but a roiling black mist, alive with destructive intent. It swelled, then surged up toward the iceberg, enveloping it in a gauze of darkness. The black haze shredded the ice into a million fragments that fell like snow. The frost dragon narrowed its eyes and hissed through clenched fangs. "Are you Duar?" The black energy answered with action rather than words. It condensed into a wind of shadow and darted straight at the dragon. The frost dragon blasted a ribbon of ice-cold air in return, but the black wind dispersed and flowed like fog. It coalesced at the dragon's head into a cloak of darkness and began to gnaw at scales and hide. The dragon's scales, hard as the deepest ice, cracked under the corrosive blackness. The hide split, chilling blood seeping out. The dragon shrieked and tried to tear the mass away, but the shadow slid through its claws like mist. The dragon resorted to blasting itself with freezing breath, crystallizing parts of the darkness into blocks of profound ice. Those ice blocks broke off, but the black mass remained unbothered and continued its attack. Then the shadow spread to the base of the dragon's wing and tore with terrible force until the wing was ripped off at the root. The dragon's scream echoed as it fell from the sky and smashed down on the ridge between Isengard and Fangorn, creating a vast crater. It lived, though grievously wounded, and hauled itself from the pit, roaring rage. The ringwraiths swept in at the dragon's summons and attacked the black energy. The shadow did not fear them. It divided into 8 writhing tentacles and tangled with the Nazgul. Their Morgul blades did nothing to halt it. Suddenly, the sky flashed as Saruman, from the back of his own dragon, called down a lightning bolt. The black mass shuddered and emitted a bestial, inhuman cry. From within the dark, painfully, Dewey's face emerged. Saruman grinned, triumphant and cruel. "Humph, boy, whatever tricks you have, you die today." The frost dragon and Saruman combined their assaults. Frost and lightning hammered the shadow. Dewey's face appeared weaker and more contorted with each blast. Then a bright horn blast split the tension like thunder, and two mithril arrows streaked toward Saruman and the Frost Dragon. Chief Blog of the Black Wildlings and King Thengel had acted at the same instant. Thengel had blown the horn of victory. The blast stunned the dragon and Saruman for a heartbeat and invigorated the shadow. Though the arrows missed, they distracted their foes, and the rain of arrows and missiles that followed bought the black mass a breathing space. Seizing it, the shadow lunged at Saruman's dragon and shredded it in an instant. The dragon collapsed, falling with Saruman on its back. The attendant roar ended in a ragged fall. The black mass ignored Saruman and turned back to the Frost Dragon. It darted past another blast of cold and climbed onto the dragon's head, clawing at the iron crown set in its skull. The crown had become part of the dragon. Tearing it free filled the beast with agony. The ringwraiths swarmed to intervene, but the shadow clung like tar, and at last, amid the dragon's tortured cries, the iron crown was ripped free and tumbled to the ground. As the crown left its head, the demonic shadow that had clouded the dragon's eyes vanished. Clarity returned. For a moment, the battlefield went dead quiet. The Nazgul hesitated. Then the Frost Dragon's eyes flamed with fury and hatred. "Sauron," it bellowed, "you vile, shameless scoundrel! You were only the servant of my old master, and you used me as your tool. You humiliated me. Revenge! I will turn Mordor into a glacier. I will destroy everything you hold, Sauron." It unleashed a wall of absolute cold. The ringwraiths were unprepared. Most were frozen solid instantly, and only the Witch King of Angmar reacted quickly enough to evade total encasement. The Frost Dragon crushed the frozen riders beneath its foot. It stamped the iron crown to powder as well, fury frantic and terrible. Then it fixed a burning gaze on Saruman. "Despicable wizard, if you had not disturbed my slumber and poisoned me with Ungoliant's venom, I would never have been twisted into Sauron's tool. And how dare you use my blood to breed those filthy, lowly mongrels? You will pay." 259. The Frost Dragon's Revenge. The Frost Dragon's hatred for Saruman was as fierce as its hatred for Sauron. It attacked Saruman with single-minded fury, spewing blasts of bitter cold in an attempt to freeze him and torment him. Saruman, having lost his mount, the enchanted dragon, was forced to fight from the ground like any other mortal. He gripped his staff, raised a ward of light to shield himself, and cried, "Glorung, we can talk." The dragon's frigid breath slammed against the light shield. The ward held, but the chill still crawled through and frosted Saruman's eyebrows and beard. He tried to parley, but the Frost Dragon wanted no conversation, only vengeance. It lunged, jaws wide for a bite. Saruman's face hardened. He hurled a massive fireball straight into the dragon's gaping mouth. The fire met the dragon's cold in a violent clash that billowed steam and mist, filling the dragon's maw and making it cough. The Frost Dragon, stung by the pain, only became more enraged and renewed its assault. Saruman answered in kind with shockwaves to push the mountain-sized beast back and with bolts of lightning. The two titans battered each other. For a long stretch, neither held the advantage. Their struggle shredded the surrounding landscape. Trees, rocks, and hills crumbled as if made of paper. The Isen River had frozen solid under the dragon's breath. What should have been early summer heat was now an Arctic blast, with blizzards keening across the plain. Around them, the Black Wildling warriors, the riders of Rohan, and even Smaug watched helplessly as spectators. At the same time, a black, mist-like energy consolidated and reformed Duir's body. When Duir returned to human shape, Chief Blog of the Black Wildlings rushed forward, concern and surprise in his voice. "Lord Duir, are you all right?" Duir offered a faint smile and shook his head. "I'm fine, and I've even gained something unexpected." At his command, his fingers blurred and dissolved into a dark mist of energy. Brog, King Thengel, and the surrounding warriors stared in awe as the black vapor reformed into his fingers. Duir's lips curved. In the heat of a life-or-death crisis, he had triggered his Obscurus form and survived. Duir had signed and acquired the Obscurial talent back in Hildorian, the birthplace of humans, but at the time he had noticed no change beyond a sudden surge of magical power and had put the matter aside. Now in Extremis, he had actually transformed into an Obscurus. In the magical world's lore, an Obscurus is a formless dark force born when a young wizard represses their magic. Those who carry it are called Obscurials. usually children raised in Muggle environments who hide or suppress their powers out of fear or abuse. The suppressed magic eventually undergoes a violent change and becomes this unstable, destructive force. An obscurus ravages its surroundings and eats away at its host's life force, which is why most obscurials rarely live past 10. The magical community has long feared them. Dewar, however, saw the obscurus differently. To him, it felt less like a curse and more like a new evolutionary direction, a kind of elementalization of the body. In obscurus form, his body became almost pure magical energy. Physical blows were ineffectual, ordinary spells barely scratched him, and he could even survive otherwise fatal magical injuries. He thought of Cadence, an obscurial who had wreaked havoc in New York and yet revived from a trace of residual obscurus energy, proof of how potent such power could be. That power had even tempted Gellert Grindelwald. There were problems, of course. Obscurial magic is notoriously unstable. When provoked, an obscurial can lose reason and lash out indiscriminately. The obscurus also steadily corrodes the host's body until the life extinguishes. Dewar found, to his surprise, that when he transformed, he did not lose his mind, nor did his magic spin out of control. Apart from the sheer difficulty of steering so much energy, it was not the frantic, self-destructive force the legends described. He suspected the difference lay in the obscurial's emotional state and upbringing. Most known obscurials had been persecuted or abused, starved of love and support, and full of negative feelings, conditions that twisted their obscurus into something dark and unstable. In other words, the obscurus took on the character of its host. As for why most obscurials died young, Dewar reasoned it was because ordinary human bodies couldn't withstand the obscurus. The power within grew like a balloon until the fragile vessel burst. But Dewar's body was not ordinary. Nourished by Ent beverages, it had acquired qualities akin to elves. The refinement of the Philosopher's Stone had further altered him. He also possessed a divine artifact, the Golden Cup, which continually strengthened him. For now, the obscurus toll remained within his tolerance. The caveat was clear. He could not remain in that form indefinitely. The longer he stayed, the more the obscurus would erode him. Having set these thoughts aside, Dewar watched the fight between Saruman and the Frost Dragon with a grim sense of satisfaction. The dragon was indeed ancient and powerful, an elder survivor of the War of Wrath. Even Dewar in obscurus form had only broken one of its wings. He had not slain it. It dominated through sheer scale, 1,000 meters of oppressive mass, and by exhaling cold that could freeze magic itself, even snuffing out fiend fire. Saruman's fire and lightning were being frozen by the dragon's breath. Saruman was not without resources. He guarded half his power against Dewar, wary of a sneak attack. He knew the mission had gone badly. His trained winged dragons were gone. The frost dragon had slipped from Sauron's control. The Nazgul had been sent back to Sauron's lair. He could not retake Isengard alone. With the dragon clinging to him like a rabid thing, and Dewar watching like a predator at his flank, Saruman was cornered and considering retreat. As Saruman conjured another ward to block the frost dragon's next blast, Dewar apparated behind him and fired a single-word curse. Avada Kedavra! Saruman, anticipating the killing curse, whipped his hand and intercepted it with a sheet of ice formed from the dragon's own cold breath. Facing attack from both dragon and man, his face grew dark. He shot Dewar a long, hard look, then spoke a command and raised a roaring wind. The gust swelled and twisted into a tornado that ripped up chunks of rock, blocks of ice, and whole trees. Dewar braced for an airborne assault, but in the next instant, Saruman himself strode into the tornado and was hurled upward, swept away to the east. The whirlwind carried him off at speed, leaving only Dewar and the frost dragon behind. The dragon bellowed in fury and tried to take wing in pursuit. Then it realized the truth. One of its wings was broken. It fixed Dewar with a murderous glare. "You freed me from Sauron's chain and stole my wings. You will still die." With that, it unleashed a blast of frozen air at Dewar. Facing the frost dragon, whose mood shifted in an instant, Dewey apparated to evade its attack and reappeared on its back. "Avada Kedavra!" he cried. A blinding green light struck the dragon. Its body stiffened, and a painful roar tore from its throat. "Damn it," Dewey thought as he vanished with another apparition. Glommer the Frost Dragon was an ancient dragon, forged by Morgoth since the First Era. Its soul was far too powerful for a single killing curse to extinguish. The curse wounded it deeply, but did not kill it. Enraged and deranged by the pain, the dragon bared its teeth. "Wizard, I will kill you!" Glamour lashed out, spewing torrents of bone-chilling cold air while its kilometers-long bulk shook the earth. Dewey kept apparating, dodging the strikes while maneuvering the beast away from Isengard. Smaug joined the fight from the air. Though smaller, his flight let him match the frost dragon's mobility. He swooped and flooded the monster with dragon flame. The giant eagle Thorondor, riding the high winds, harried the dragon too. In a diving pass, he seized a gap in the scales with razor talons and tore away a chunk of flesh. The frost dragon howled and snapped at him, but Thorondor eluded the bite. A shock of pain came from the dragon's tail. A 10-meter-tall, three-headed wolf, Cerberus, was clamped on, its venomous, corrosive teeth breaking past the scales to rip at raw hide. The frost dragon swung its massive tail and flung Cerberus like a stone into a mountainside kilometers away. The wolf whimpered and lay stunned and out of the fight. "Cerberus," Dewey called, concerned, then turned his gaze back to the dragon. His eyes clouded white-black, a mist rolled from his form, and he dematerialized into a vast, surging black fog. In Obscurus form, he became a single, destructive mass of black magic, rushing toward the frost dragon faster than the wind. The mist struck like sand, grinding and corroding the dragon's scales until the vulnerable hide beneath was exposed and torn open, cold blood flowing. Even so, Glamour was not easily felled. The dragon sprayed cold air across its own flanks to condense a thick crust of ice, an armor that encased it and repelled Smaug's fire and Dewey's assaults. The attackers could only melt or shatter the outer ice. The dragon's true bulk remained protected. Worse, the beast quickly understood Dewey's aim to lure it away from Isengard. Its cruel eyes swept the Dunlending warriors and Rohan cavalry at the foot of Orthanc, and a savage smile crossed its maw. "You care for these mortals? Then I will freeze this place solid." Without waiting for reply, it unleashed cold air indiscriminately. The temperature plummeted, frost clenched the ground, breath froze into glittering ice crystals. The chill sank into every bone. If it were allowed to spread, everyone would die within 10 minutes. Dewey condensed his upper body from the Obscurus form and barreled toward Isengard's walls, conjuring fiend fire with a wave of his hand. The fire roared outward and coalesced into a towering fiend fire wall around the fortress. The flames blocked the spread of the cold air, then coalesced into a fiend fire balrog. The balrog drew a burning whip and lashed at the frost dragon, cracking ice armor plate. The dragon answered with a burst of cold air that frozen the whip in an instant, extinguishing the blast. Fire and ice clashed, each consuming the other in a war of quantity and endurance. Fog rose across Isengard from the steaming melt. Under the dragon's influence, it crystallized into suspended snow. In that blindness, Basilisk Herpo slithered unseen behind the frost dragon. Seizing the distraction, it bit an unscaled seam and injected all its stored venom. The dragon shrieked and spun to retaliate, opening its maw to breathe the attacker into oblivion, only to meet a pair of orange-yellow reptilian eyes. One glance from the basilisk, and the dragon's soul was grievously wounded. It howled in agony. Dewey materialized at its side and struck again with Avada Kedavra. Surrounded by Dewey, Smaug, Thorondor, Basilisk Herpo, the Fiendfire Balrog, and the watchful Dunlending and Rohirrim, the frost dragon felt genuine fear for the first time. An ancient survivor that prized its life above all, it had never faced true mortal peril until that moment. After repelling the attackers with a spray of cold air, it spun and fled toward the misty mountains without hesitation. The dragon knew the human realms lay east, south, and west. Only the northward, rugged range offered barrier and escape. Unable to fly, it plodded with massive limbs, rumbling the earth as it went. "Catch it! Don't let it get away!" Dewey shouted. He shifted into Obscurus form again and streaked after the beast like a black gale. He had no wish to leave a dragon that already marked him for vengeance. Better to end the threat now than wait for the moment Glamour struck back. Dewey's Obscurus body was weightless and formless, pure destructive force. He closed the distance fast. The frost dragon spun and sprayed cold air. The black mist scattered to avoid it, then reformed and cloaked the dragon in a shadowy sheet, leeching and corroding the flesh. The dragon spasmed and tried to coat itself in fresh ice, hoping to freeze Dewey. Even the Obscurus dared not stand in the direct blast and was forced to withdraw. Smaug and Thorondor caught up, and Herpo Road clung to Smaug's flank. From above, Smaug breathed, and the basilisk used the moments of exposed skin to unleash its lethal gaze once more. The frost dragon's cold air could not guard every angle. The basilisk's eyes struck true, and Smaug's flame smashed through as the ice armor melted away. Thorondor dived and ripped at a newly exposed wound with talons, tearing a crimson flap. The dragon bellowed. Dewey struck again with the killing curse. The frost dragon's soul fire dimmed as if about to go out. Desperation flamed in its eyes. "If you want me dead, we will die together," it raged. A lethal cold burst from its core, low, resonant in its throat. The dragon intoned in dragon language magic, drawing on the surrounding natural energy and sacrificing part of its life force. "No, retreat. He's using dragon language sorcery to burn his life force," Smaug warned, sensing the ritual. Dewey withdrew instantly, returning to a safe distance in Obscurus form. In the next heartbeat, an unimaginable cold unfurled from the dragon, a freezing that ate the air and ground. The blast swept outward in a ring, crystallizing trees, rocks, birds, everything it touched, turning even the air an icy blue. The sacrifice spanned more than 10 miles. Smaug's warning and Dewey's quick retreat saved those closest. He threw up a protective barrier in time and avoided complete freeze. Thorondor, Smaug, and the basilisk Herpo, who rode with Smaug, pulled back and survived, though a crust of frost covered them, and Herpo was driven toward lethargy, teetering at the edge of hibernation. At the epicenter, the frost dragon did not perish outright. True to its nature, it had conserved the greater part of its life, paying only enough to execute the devastating blast. Had it meant to die, the freezing would have been far worse, enough to snuff out Dewey and all who pursued. Drained and nearly spent, the frost dragon could no longer spew cold air. Weak and gasping, it fled deeper into the misty mountains, and the battle was over for now.